I was seated near the kitchen doors at my son's gala when my daughter-in-law threw a pack of wet wipes in front of me. Use these. You're making everyone uncomfortable. More than 300 guests laughed. Minutes later, an older woman stopped me in the hallway and pressed an antique pendulum clock into my hands. Your wife told me to give you this when it finally begins, she whispered. Before I could speak, she vanished. That night, when the clock stopped at exactly 11:17, I discovered the truth my son had buried. This story won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to protect someone from a person you both trusted? Yes or no? Your experiences matter. Quick note. Certain details have been adjusted for storytelling, but the heart of this story, the message about protection and justice, is what I hope stays with you. Table 14 sat exactly 14 feet from the kitchen doors, close enough that I could smell the reheated catering trays and hear the dishwashers clattering while my son celebrated his empire 300 guests away. I was 68 years old, 41 of those spent as a cardiovascular surgeon, and I understood precision. The placement wasn't accidental. Vernon had seated me at the worst table in the Houstonian Hotel Grand Ballroom corner position, beside the HVAC intake, cheap linens, no centerpiece, far enough from the stage that the speeches would blur into expensive noise. The seating chart was a scalpel, and I was the specimen. Sloane arrived first, my daughter-in-law, in a black Valentino gown that cost more than my monthly pension. 37-years-old diamonds at her throat and a pack of wet wipes clutched in her manicured hand like a grenade. Sit down, father, she whispered, her voice slicing through the ballroom murmur. You're making everyone uncomfortable. She shoved the wipes into my palm, the travel-size kind you give to toddlers, and walked away before I could respond. The gesture landed like a diagnosis: incompetent, incontinent, erasable. I sat. The chair wobbled. Across the ballroom, Vernon stood at table 1, surrounded by Henderson Capital executives. Champagne flute raised in his right hand, Patek Philippe. Watch catching the chandeliers. My son, 41 years old, $8,000 Brioni tuxedo, tailored to disguise the weight he'd gained since his mother's funeral. Hair professionally darkened to hide the gray I'd passed down genetically. He laughed at something Conrad Bentley said, his back turned deliberately toward table 14. I counted 17 pairs of eyes lock onto me and look away. In Houston, people do not align themselves with losers. I'd taught residents that principle in operating rooms for decades. Confidence attracts investment. Hesitation repels it. Tonight, I was hesitation personified, the old surgeon at the cheap table clutching wet wipes, radioactive with failure. The kitchen door swung open behind me, releasing a blast of steam and the metallic smell of industrial dishwashing. A server placed a breadbasket on my table without meeting my eyes. I lifted a roll. Stale, of course. Vernon's voice cut through the ballroom from the microphone at table 1. To the future of Medcrest Properties. He announced, his tone smooth as anesthesia. Built on vision, sacrifice, and family legacy, 300 guests raised their glasses. Not one of them looked at the family who'd built that legacy, sitting 14 feet from the kitchen, smelling like reheated spinach and humiliation. That's when the architecture became clear. This wasn't carelessness. Vernon had choreographed public degradation as the opening act of asset seizure. Table 14 was psychological warfare, visible enough that everyone saw my exile, isolated enough that no one would intervene. He was establishing a narrative the confused old father gently managed by the responsible son, too diminished to protest his own erasure. I had performed over 2,000 open-heart surgeries in my career, every time absolute stillness, while knowing 1 millimeter of error ends a life. Tonight, I needed that exact skill one more time. 35 years saving lives in operating rooms, and it all came down to this. A cheap napkin, a basket of stale bread, and my son's back turned to me across a sea of champagne glasses. The speeches blurred. Dessert arrived, something chocolate I didn't taste. By 8:15, guests had begun filtering toward the exits, the evening's performance complete. Vernon crossed the ballroom in 6 deliberate strides, his smile fixed for the remaining witnesses. His hand closed around my upper arm, not gentle, not violent, clinical. Let's get some air, Dad, he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear the filial concern. He pulled me toward the east wing corridor, past the coat check, past the event staff clearing tables, into the marble-tiled men's restroom at the hallway's end. The door locked behind us with a brass click that echoed off imported Italian tile. Vernon placed a black leather briefcase on the vanity between the gold-plated faucets, opened it, extracted 3 documents each, flagged with neon arrows pointing to signature lines. "Just sign, Father," he said, his voice dropping the performance now that we were alone. "You don't have to worry any more. We'll handle everything." I studied each page under the recessed lighting. First document, absolute durable power of attorney, granting Vernon Harlan complete authority over Roland Harlan's financial, medical, and legal decisions, effective immediately, irrevocable. Second document, voluntary admission agreement for Sunrise Manor assisted living facility, acknowledging cognitive decline and requesting permanent residential care. Third document, pension account management authorization transferring my retirement disbursements to Medcrest Properties Management, LLC, for appropriate allocation and elder care expenses. 3 signatures to erase 68 years of autonomy. Vernon held out a Gold Cross pen, the kind pharmaceutical reps give to doctors as promotional gifts. I recognized it. I'd received an identical one in 1997 from a Lipitor sales representative. Vernon must have found it in my desk. "This is what's best for everyone?" he said. I took the pen. It felt light cheap, despite the gold plating. My hand still steady, despite what Vernon wanted. The world to believe moved across the first signature line. Roland Harlan, then the second. Roland Harlan, then the third. Roland Harlan. Vernon exhaled, his shoulders dropping half an inch. Victory. He thought he'd just acquired his father like a distressed asset purchased for the price of a ballroom humiliation and a locked restroom. "There we go. Good," he said, tucking the documents back into the briefcase with the satisfied efficiency of a man who'd just closed a deal. "This is what's best for everyone." He patted my shoulder 2 quick taps, the kind you give subordinates, and unlocked the restroom door. I followed him into the corridor, my face carefully arranged in the defeated resignation he expected. But my mind was calculating, counting, remembering what Estelle had prepared before the cancer took her. The trust documents, the contingency clauses, the lawyer in San Antonio who'd never met Vernon and never would. My son had no idea what he'd just signed. Not the power of attorney, not the admissions paperwork, not the pension transfer. He'd signed his own indictment, written in ink he couldn't see yet on pages that wouldn't surface for weeks. And I thought, walking behind him through that expensive hotel corridor, while he carried his briefcase full of worthless paper, "Oh, Vernon, you just performed surgery on yourself, and you have no idea how deep the incision goes." The duffel bag Vernon handed me at the valet portico was the kind you buy at a gas station for $19. Nylon fraying at the seams, smelling faintly of diesel fuel and someone else's laundry. He'd walked me out of the restroom and through the emptying ballroom, like a nurse escorting a confused patient, his hand firm on my elbow, his smile fixed for the remaining guests who pretended not to notice. The signed documents were safely tucked in his briefcase. As far as Vernon knew, he'd just acquired complete legal control over what remained of his father's life. Outside October, rain hammered the portico awning in sheets, the kind of downpour Houston gets when tropical moisture stalls over the Gulf, turning streets into rivers and drowning visibility past 10 feet. Vernon set the duffel bag on the wet concrete between us. "Your Uber is already queued up," he said, checking his phone. "Go get some rest, Father. This is what's best." I opened the bag. 3 sets of clothes, old polo shirts I'd donated to Goodwill 2 years ago, sweatpants, with stretched elastic underwear that wasn't mine. A prescription bottle of blood pressure medication, the label printed that afternoon, from a pharmacy I'd never visited, and a slip of paper with an address handwritten in Sloane's sharp cursive, Northside boarding house room 214. Behind Vernon, through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Sloane posing for selfies, with the remaining Henderson Capital wives. Her phone angled to catch the chandeliers. She didn't look toward the portico, didn't offer to hold an umbrella, didn't acknowledge that her father-in-law was being evicted into a storm with a gas station duffel bag. 3 years ago, I'd stood on this exact tarmac in September, Sunshine handing Vernon a cashier's check for $3 million. My retirement savings. My clinic sale proceeds 41 years of cardiovascular surgery, converted into a single piece of paper that would save his failing real estate company. He'd wept in my arms right here, his expensive cologne mixing with Texas heat, his voice breaking as he promised, "Dad, I will never forget this." Now he stood in the same spot, dry under the portico awning, checking his phone while rain soaked my shoulders. "The driver's waiting," Vernon said, not looking up. I threw the strap over my shoulder and stepped directly into the downpour. Rain hit like cold nails, soaking through my shirt in seconds, turning the cheap nylon bag slick under my grip. The Uber idled at the curb, a Toyota Camry with a cracked taillight and air freshener strong enough to smell from 6 feet away. I didn't look back. In 41 years as a husband, a father, and a surgeon, I'd learned one absolute truth. Sometimes silence is the most terrifying answer you can give. Let Vernon stand there wondering if I'd understood what just happened. Let him check his phone and confirm the surveillance feed was live. Let him believe his confused old father was too broken to recognize betrayal. The Uber driver, a kid maybe 25 Houston Astros cap, reggaeton playing low on the stereo, glanced at my soaked clothes in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. Northside wasn't far. 15 minutes in rain traffic north on Shepherd, past the closed auto shops and 24-hour laundromats, into the part of Houston where check-cashing stores outnumber banks. We pulled up to the Northside boarding house at 11:30. Two-story converted motel, peeling beige paint. Neon vacancy sign flickering in the rain. The driver waited until I'd closed the door before accelerating away, his taillights disappearing into the downpour like he couldn't leave fast enough. Room 214 was on the second floor, accessed by an exterior metal staircase that rang hollow under my shoes. The key Vernon had included in the duffel bag, an actual metal key, not a card the kind that opens doors, built in 1987, turned with the grinding resistance of a lock that needed graphite. The room was exactly 120 square feet. I'd spent enough time reading hospital blueprints to estimate dimensions on site. Yellow wallpaper water-stained in the corners. Single twin bed with a thin mattress that sagged in the middle. Small wooden desk bolted to the wall. One window overlooking the concrete parking lot, rain streaming down the glass in rivulets that caught the neon vacancy sign's red pulse. On the windowsill sat a potted plant. Porcelain flower, vibrant green leaves, healthy and obviously recently placed. Someone had watered it that afternoon. The soil was damp, the ceramic pot expensive, completely out of place in a $19 a night boarding house room. I performed my habitual environmental sweep. 41 years of entering new hospital wards had trained the reflex into muscle memory check corners. For equipment scan walls for outlets, and oxygen ports identify exits and sightlines. The military does it. Surgeons do it. Anyone who's responsible for life in unfamiliar spaces learns to read a room in 30 seconds. That's when I saw it. Top right corner of the wardrobe where the trim met the ceiling. A microscopic anomaly, black lens the size of a pencil eraser, professional-grade miniature surveillance camera, the kind security companies install in banks. Hidden behind decorative trim, but not well enough. Vernon must have paid someone to install it yesterday, maybe this morning, while setting up the room. He was watching. I stood perfectly still for 3 heartbeats, my wet clothes dripping onto the thin carpet, my mind calculating angles and implications. The camera had a clear view of the bed, the desk, the window. It would capture everything, how I moved, what I said, whether I appeared confused or competent, declining or stable. Vernon needed documentation. The power of attorney required proof of incapacity. The assisted living admission needed evidence of cognitive decline. The pension transfer needed justification. This camera would provide time-stamped footage of his father, wandering, forgetting, deteriorating. Except I wasn't deteriorating. I stared directly into the lens for 4 seconds, long enough to see the tiny red indicator light, short enough to seem accidental. Then I turned away with the careful confusion of someone who'd noticed something strange, but couldn't quite process what. I opened my blood pressure medication with hands. I deliberately made tremble fingers, fumbling the child-proof cap, exactly the way Vernon expected. Swallowed the pill with tap water from the bathroom sink, my reflection in the mirror, showing exactly what the camera needed to see an old man defeated, diminished alone. The performance had begun. What Vernon didn't know, what he couldn't know, because Estelle had made sure the attorney, in San Antonio, had never met our son and never would, was that every move he made to trap me had already been anticipated by someone far smarter than both of us. My wife had seen this coming years before the cancer took her, and she'd built countermeasures Vernon wouldn't discover until they'd already destroyed him. The knock on my door came at 8 o'clock the following morning, soft rhythmic, accompanied by my son's voice, calling through the hollow wood. "Father, I brought you breakfast." I'd slept 3 hours. The rest of the night I'd spent sitting at the bolted desk, watching the surveillance camera's tiny red light blink in the wardrobe trim, calculating dosages and timelines. Vernon wouldn't waste time. Whatever he'd planned required documentation of decline, and documentation required observable symptoms. Chemical intervention was the obvious choice, controllable, deniable, medically plausible for a man my age. I shuffled to the door with the careful gait I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror. At 6 a.m., opened it slowly, blinking against the hallway fluorescent light like it hurt my eyes. Vernon stood in khakis and a pressed Oxford shirt, holding a plastic cafeteria tray. One glass of milk, whole milk, the expensive organic kind from Central Market. One piece of wheat toast with butter. A paper napkin. His smile was warm, practiced, the kind you give to terminal patients when you need them comfortable but compliant. "Thought you could use a good breakfast," he said, stepping past me into the room without waiting for invitation. "Keep your strength up." He set the tray on the desk, adjusting its position slightly, making sure the camera had a clear angle. Then he lifted the milk glass and held it toward me, his other hand gesturing like a nurse encouraging a reluctant child. "Drink your milk, Father. You need your calcium at your age." I took the glass. The moment it reached my face, I caught it, the distinct chemical odor of dissolved lorazepam, masked poorly by whole milk fat. Benzodiazepine sedative, 0.5 milligrams, standard dose. The kind I'd prescribed 10,000 times for preoperative anxiety and post-surgical agitation. After 35 years of writing those prescriptions at Houston Methodist, I knew that scent as intimately as the smell of my morning coffee. Lorazepam, of course. I let my hand tremble just slightly, the natural shake of morning stiffness, and raised the glass to my lips. Took what looked like a sip. Let the milk touch my tongue without swallowing, held it there for 3 seconds. While Vernon watched, then lowered the glass and made a small pleased sound. "Good," Vernon said, patting my shoulder. "I'll check on you this evening. Rest today. Don't try to go anywhere." He left. The lock clicked. I counted to 30, then walked to the bathroom and spit the milk into the sink, rinsing my mouth 3 times with tap water that tasted like rust and chlorine. Back at the desk, I lifted the glass and looked at the porcelain plant on the windowsill. Still vibrant green, healthy leaves catching the morning light through rain-streaked glass. I poured the entire contents into its soil, 8 ounces of poisoned milk, disappearing into dark potting mix. The plant would be my documentation. Every dose Vernon gave me, I'd give to it. By week 3, the leaves would begin to yellow. By week 6, it would die. And when it did, forensic analysis of the soil would show exactly what killed. It concentrated at lorazepam at 11 times therapeutic. Dose a timeline of systematic poisoning preserved in ceramic and earth. I sat back down, opened the medication bottle Vernon had included in my duffel bag. Actual blood pressure medication, lisinopril. 10 milligrams prescribed legitimately because I actually needed it. Took one with water. Let the camera see an old man following instructions, taking his pills, drinking his milk, declining right on schedule. Lorazepam 0.5 milligrams daily. By week 3, the patient exhibits short-term cognitive impairment. By week 6, retrograde amnesia sets in, disorientation increases, and decision-making capacity becomes legally questionable. I wrote those exact words in a medical textbook in 2001. My son must have read it. Maybe he'd even highlighted the passage, studied the pharmacokinetics, calculated the exact timeline needed to establish incompetency before a judge. What Vernon didn't know was that the victim he was poisoning had written the manual he was following. 4 days later, on October 22nd, I walked to the Kroger supermarket 6 blocks north of the boarding house. Vernon had seized my car, a 12-year-old Honda Accord, claiming I was unsafe to drive. So I walked, carrying an old canvas bag, wearing the donated polo shirt and stretched sweatpants, looking exactly like what Vernon needed me to be, a confused old man without resources. The Kroger parking lot was nearly empty at 10:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. Warm October sun, the kind Houston gets after the rain systems push back into the Gulf. I was halfway across the concrete when I heard my name. Roland? Faye Thornton stood beside a silver Buick 70 years old and weathered from decades in hospital wards as chief nursing supervisor at Houston Methodist. She'd been Estelle's best friend since nursing school in 1976. 47 years of friendship that outlasted marriages, careers, and eventually my wife's life. She didn't smile. Didn't pretend this was a pleasant coincidence. Estelle told me to give you something, Faye said, unzipping her oversized canvas purse. She said if a day comes when he truly needs this, he will know exactly what to do. She pulled out a walnut pendulum clock. Solid wood brass mechanism, visible through the glass face, Roman numerals, hand-painted in black enamel. I'd given it to Estelle on our wedding night in 1983. Bought it from an antique shop in Galveston with my first residence paycheck. Faye placed it in my hands. The weight was exactly as I remembered, 3 pounds the wood warm from sitting in her car. Today is that day, Roland, Faye said quietly. She knew it would come. She prepared. My throat closed. The parking lot blurred. And one more thing, Faye added, her voice dropping to something hard and furious. She died of pancreatic cancer. Not a heart attack, no matter what your son told the hospital board. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. 6 months from diagnosis to death. Vernon knew. He watched her waste away, and then he lied about it at her memorial service. She zipped her purse, walked to her car, drove away. I stood in the middle of that Kroger parking lot, holding the clock I'd given my wife 41 years ago, feeling the brass pendulum swing gently inside its walnut case. The sun was warm on my shoulders. The canvas bag hung empty from my wrist. And I knew with the absolute certainty that comes from 4 decades of marriage that Estelle was trying to speak to me across the veil. 41 years of marriage don't end just because the heart stops beating. She'd known this day would come, known Vernon would strike, known I'd need something, some weapon, some proof, some message she could only deliver after death when Vernon believed she could no longer protect me. The clock ticked steadily in my hands, counting seconds I didn't waste. The walnut pendulum clock sat on my desk in room 214, ticking with the same steady rhythm I remembered from 41 years of Sunday evenings, when Estelle's piano music drifted through our home and time felt infinite. I'd carried it back from the Kroger parking lot, Faye's words echoing with every step. If a day comes when he truly needs this, he will know exactly what to do. Now it sat beside the lamp, measuring seconds while I pretended to read a paperback thriller Vernon had left in my duffel bag. 11 o'clock arrived, then 11:05. I turned pages without reading them, listening to the pendulum's brass weight swing behind glass. A surgeon's intuition. After 41 years of entering operating rooms, you learn to trust when something feels mechanically wrong. The clock's weight was off, the pendulum's arc too shallow, the ticking rhythm fractionally irregular, like a heartbeat with premature ventricular contractions. Something was wedged inside the mechanism that didn't belong there. At 11:15 I stood and stretched, performing the careful movements of an old man stiff from sitting. Let my hand rest on the clock's walnut case, feeling the wood grain. 2 minutes. At exactly 11:17 p.m. the pendulum locked mid-swing. The click was mechanical, deliberate, completely divorced from standard clockwork. The brass weight froze at a 40-degree angle, the ticking stopped, and the second hand continued sweeping as if nothing had changed. But something had. Estelle had built a trigger mechanism into our wedding gift. I glanced at the surveillance camera in the wardrobe trim, its red light still blinking. Vernon would be watching footage later, looking for signs of confusion, the cognitive decline his poison was supposed to be causing. I needed to give him exactly that. I stood, slowly lifted the clock with both hands, turned it over, like I was examining something that had mysteriously stopped. Let confusion cross my face, set it back down. Picked up my phone. Vernon had returned it that afternoon, cleared of contacts and apps, and carried it with the clock toward the bathroom. The camera couldn't see through walls. I locked the bathroom door, set the clock on the sink's porcelain edge under harsh fluorescent light that flickered every 11 seconds. The back panel was held by 4 tiny flathead screws, antique brass. I had nothing resembling a screwdriver, but I had a toothbrush. I snapped the handle, creating a flat edge from the broken plastic. I have unscrewed surgical implants from beating hearts with tools smaller than toothpicks. The back panel of a walnut clock posed no challenge to a cardiovascular surgeon with 41 years of steady hands. 4 minutes later, the screws came free. The back panel lifted away, and there wedged flat between the walnut casing and the brass, gear assembly, vacuum sealed, in sterile surgical film, a micro SD card. No larger than my fingernail, black plastic. 64 gigabytes stamped on the casing in white print. Estelle had hidden a memory card inside the clock I'd given her on our wedding night in 1983. 41 years it had sat on our bedroom dresser, ticking through decades of marriage. And somewhere in those final months between diagnosis and death, she'd opened it, inserted this card, set the trigger for 11:17 p.m., and sealed it back up. Why 11:17? I turned the card over in my palm. The surgical film crinkled. My reflection stared back from the bathroom mirror. 68 years old gray stubble eyes that looked 20 years older than they had at the gala. The leaky faucet dripped, one drop every 7 seconds, rhythmic as a metronome. I peeled the surgical film away carefully, the way you remove sterile packaging from cardiac stents. The micro SD card beneath was pristine, perfectly preserved. I held it up to the light. No scratches, no damage. My phone had a card slot hidden under the battery cover. Vernon must not have known, or he'd have disabled it. I slid the card home. The phone recognized it immediately. A folder appeared, Estelle_files. Inside 4 items. Video _0. 01.mp4 847 megabytes. Video _002.mp4 612 megabytes. Video _003.mp4 391 megabytes. Ledger _financial.pdf 847 pages. My breath caught. The bathroom walls seemed to contract. 847 megabytes, 612, 391, and a financial ledger spanning 847 pages. Estelle had documented something, multiple somethings. She'd recorded 3 separate video files and compiled nearly 1,000 pages of financial records. All of it hidden inside the wedding gift I'd carried from Galveston to Houston 41 years ago, waiting for the exact moment I'd need it. Waiting for 11:17. I stared at the first file. Video _001.mp4, the largest. My thumb hovered over the play button. The faucet dripped. The fluorescent buzzed. Outside the bathroom door, room 214 sat under surveillance. But in here, behind a locked door with a phone screen glowing in my hands, I was invisible. I pressed play. The video loaded, buffering circle spinning. Then the first frame appeared, a bedroom. Our bedroom, the one Estelle and I had shared for 38 years before the cancer. The angle was wrong, too high looking down from above the dresser. She'd hidden a camera in our bedroom, pointing at the bed. And then the image moved. A figure entered frame. I recognized the walk, the posture, the expensive watch. Vernon. My hands that had never shaken across 2,000 open-heart surgeries, that remained steady when cutting within millimeters of the cardiac nerve, that never wavered even when patients crashed on the table, began to tremble. The video played, and I watched my son do something I never imagined he was capable of. I sat on the closed toilet lid in that cramped bathroom phone screen, casting blue light across my face, the leaky faucet counting seconds like a death clock. The fluorescent buzzed, the video continued, and I recognized exactly where Estelle had hidden the camera, exactly when she'd started recording, and exactly why she'd needed to document what came next. The first frame resolved on my phone screen. At 11:46 p.m., our kitchen at the River Oaks residence filmed. From the angle of the small ceramic owl Estelle kept on the shelf above the refrigerator, a nanny cam she'd installed, without telling me, pointing directly at the counter where Sloane stood, at 6:15 a.m., holding a carton of milk. I recognized the robe, black silk monogrammed, the one she wore every morning while making her coffee before Vernon woke up. She set the milk carton on the granite counter, reached into her robe pocket, pulled out a prescription bottle, amber plastic white cap, the label clear enough to read, even on my phone's small screen, lorazepam 1 milligram 30 tablets, prescribed to Vernon Harlan for anxiety. She opened it, counted out 3 pills, dropped them into the milk carton, screwed the cap back on, shook it thoroughly, the liquid sloshing inside, dissolving the sedative into solution, put the bottle back in her pocket, placed the milk in the refrigerator, walked out of frame. The timestamp read September 14th, 2023, 5 weeks before the gala. Estelle had been dead for 2 months when Sloane started poisoning me. The ceramic owl. Estelle bought it 3 years ago at a craft fair in Galveston. I thought it was hideous. She said it made her smile. It was a camera. My wife had been running a surveillance operation while dying of pancreatic cancer, documenting crimes that hadn't fully materialized yet, building an evidence archive for a war she knew would come after her death. I pressed play on the second file. Video _002.mp4. 7 minutes, 12 seconds. Our living room at the River Oaks house, filmed from a different angle, the bookshelf maybe, or the mantel clock. The timestamp read October 3rd, 2023, 2 weeks before the gala. Vernon entered frame, stumbling slightly. Drunk, a bottle of bourbon in his left hand, half empty. He crossed to the wall where our wedding portraits hung 41 years of framed memories, starting with our ceremony in 1983 and ending with our 40th anniversary photo from last year. He lifted the first frame off the wall, stared at it, then smashed it against the hardwood floor. Glass exploded. The photograph Estelle in her wedding dress, me in my rental tuxedo, both of us 27 years old and stupidly happy, tore down the middle. Vernon picked up the next frame, smashed it, then the next, and the next. 41 years of marriage destroyed in 90 seconds, while my daughter-in-law stood in the background holding a glass of red wine, watching like it was performance art. Then Vernon crossed to the kitchen, pulled a stack of documents from the drawer beneath the oven papers I recognized as family records. Birth certificates, old tax returns, turned on the gas stove, held them over the flame until they caught fire, then dropped them in the sink, letting them burn to ash. Finally, he walked to the bedroom. The camera angle shifted. Estelle must have installed multiple devices. Vernon opened her jewelry box on the dresser, the walnut box I'd given her on our 10th anniversary. He dumped the contents on the bed. Rings, bracelets, the pearl necklace from our 25th anniversary. And then he found it. Her wedding ring. White gold simple band worn thin from 4 decades of wear. He held it up to the light, looked at it, walked to the bathroom, and flushed it down the toilet. Sloane stood in the bedroom doorway the entire time, sipping Cabernet like she was watching television. The video ended. I sat on the closed toilet lid in room 214, phone screen casting blue light across my face, the leaky faucet dripping its steady rhythm. My hands had stopped trembling. Something colder had replaced the tremor. Something surgical. I turned off the screen, sat there in the absolute darkness of the bathroom. Not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I knew exactly what had to be done, and I needed my hands to stop shaking before I walked back out. The third file wasn't a video. It was a compressed folder containing an 847-page scanned PDF ledger _financial.pdf. I didn't watch it in the bathroom. I waited until the next morning, October 23rd, after Vernon's daily visit with the poisoned milk, after I'd poured it into the porcelain plant and watched him leave with his satisfied smile. Then I sat at the small desk, plugged my phone into the wall charger, and began reading. Page 1. Medcrest Properties Accounts. Receivable January 2020. Page 50. Delaware Shell Company Registration Coastal Holdings, LLC. Page 112 Wire Transfer Routing Diagrams, showing my $3 million entering Medcrest's account on September 17th, 2020, then immediately cycling out through 3 separate shell companies within 72 hours. My retirement savings had never been used as actual business capital. It had been laundered, cleaned, legitimized, used to wash illicit cash from what the ledger called syndicate real estate acquisitions, underground deals involving properties seized through fraudulent foreclosures, elderly asset exploitation, predatory lending schemes. Page 314 separate acquisition contracts bearing my forged signature, making me the legal purchaser of record for properties I'd never seen, never authorized, never knew existed. Vernon had used me as his clean legal shield. Page 647 IRS filing documents, showing Vernon had declared my $3 million as a business loan, then claimed it as a loss when the shell companies failed, deducting $2.1 million in fraudulent tax write-offs over 4 years. 4 days I spent reading that ledger. Every morning Vernon delivered the milk. Every morning I performed my confused gratitude for the hidden camera. Every morning after he left, I poured 8 ounces of lorazepam solution into the soil of the porcelain plant. "You're looking stronger today, Father," Vernon said on day 3. "Keep drinking that milk. Doctor's orders." I smiled, nodded, let my hand shake slightly as I lifted the glass. The plant's leaves had begun to yellow. Page 847. I closed the notebook where I'd transcribed the most damning evidence, the wire transfers, the forged signatures, the shell company routing the tax fraud documentation. Outside the window, Houston was waking up to a normal Friday morning. October 27th, 2023. And I, a 68-year-old man sitting in a boarding house room that cost less than a nice dinner, now held enough leverage to tear down an empire. Meanwhile, the porcelain plant on the windowsill, vibrant green when I'd arrived 10 days ago, now displayed leaves that had begun to curl at the edges, tips turning brown, the soil saturated with 5 days of concentrated sedative. The poison my son thought was destroying my mind was instead creating the most damning piece of forensic evidence he could have possibly left behind. Tomorrow, I would take the first step toward using it. The law offices on Richmond Avenue occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated brick building from 1952, and when I stepped through the frosted glass door carrying my Dollar General notebook and Estelle's micro SD card, Quentin Mercer rose from behind his mahogany desk not as a stranger, but as an old friend who'd been waiting for this exact moment for 2 years. I'd taken the bus. Vernon still believed I was confined to room 214, drinking my poisoned milk, declining on schedule. The surveillance camera would show an empty room from 1:30 to 4 p.m., enough time for a confused old man to wander to the corner store, maybe get lost, eventually find his way back. But I wasn't lost. I was exactly where Estelle had planned for me to be. Quentin was 62, salt and pepper temples, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of lawyer who wore Brooks Brothers suits without trying to impress anyone. His corner office was lined with case law volumes and family photographs, children, grandchildren, a golden retriever. The window overlooked Richmond Avenue's lunch hour traffic sunlight cutting through October haze. He didn't shake my hand. He gripped my shoulder, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "She told me you'd come. I've been ready." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, set my notebook down, the micro SD card. "How long have you known?" I asked. Quentin settled back into his chair, fingers steepled. 2 years. Estelle called me in September 2021. Said she needed to prepare for a war that hadn't started yet. She didn't tell me everything, just that Vernon would eventually try to erase you, and when he did, you'd need legal armor he couldn't penetrate. 2 years. That was 4 months after her pancreatic cancer diagnosis. Stage 4. 6-month prognosis. She'd spent her remaining time not fighting the disease, but fighting for me. She called me for the last time 1 week before her hospitalization. Quentin continued, his voice quiet. She said, "If a day comes when he walks through your door, it means everything I feared has come to pass. Protect him. Use everything I prepared." 1 week before the cancer put her in Houston Methodist for the final time. She'd known she was dying. Known Vernon would strike the moment she was gone. Known I'd need weapons I didn't even understand existed. Quentin opened a locked drawer in his desk, pulled out a dossier 3 inches thick, bound in navy leather, set it between us. "This is 2 years of legal preparation," he said. "Estelle didn't leave you defenseless. She left you a fortress." He opened to the first tabbed section, slid a document across the mahogany surface. "Certified medical evaluation," Quentin said, "conducted by Dr. Helena Voss, board-certified neurologist at Baylor College of Medicine. Independent. Unimpeachable. She evaluated you on August 12th, 2022, 14 months ago." I looked at the letterhead. Official seal. Signature. Date stamped and notarized. The evaluation was comprehensive. Cognitive function testing. Memory assessment. Executive function analysis. 2 hours of neurological examination documented across 11 pages. Conclusion. Page 11. Paragraph 3. Patient demonstrates full cognitive capacity consistent with healthy aging. No evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or diminished decision-making ability. Patient is fully competent under Texas Estates Code Section 751.033 to execute legal documents, manage financial affairs, and make independent medical decisions. August 12th, 2022. 14 months before Vernon forced me to sign those documents in the hotel restroom. 14 months before the gala. 14 months before the family doctor. Vernon Bribe diagnosed me with cognitive decline. Estelle arranged this, I asked. Quentin nodded. She told Dr. Voss she wanted baseline cognitive documentation for estate planning purposes. Completely legal, completely admissible, and it establishes with medical certainty that you were cognitively sound, long before Vernon's scheme even began. I stared at the signature. Dr. Helena Voss, M.D. Ph.D., Baylor College of Medicine. The kind of credentials that destroy small-town family doctors who sign fraudulent diagnoses for cash. Vernon's doctor, the one who declared me incompetent last month, this invalidates his evaluation, I said. It doesn't just invalidate it, Quentin replied. It destroys it. Under Texas law, a recent diagnosis of cognitive decline must be reconcilable with prior medical history. You have certified proof from 14 months ago that your cognitive function was perfect. Any court will ask, how does a man with flawless neurological capacity suddenly develop severe dementia in 14 months with zero intervening medical events? The answer is, he doesn't. The diagnosis is fraudulent. He turned to the next tab section. There's more, Quentin said. Estelle didn't just protect your cognitive capacity. She protected your legal autonomy, your financial assets, and your ability to challenge any document Vernon might force you to sign under duress. I felt something loosen in my chest. The weight I'd been carrying since the gala, since the restroom, since the duffel bag, since the poisoned milk shifted. Not gone, but balanced by something equally heavy on the other side of the scale. Estelle had seen this coming, not intuited it, not suspected it. Seen it. With enough certainty to spend her dying months building legal fortifications I hadn't known existed. Why didn't she tell me? I asked. Quentin's expression softened. She said you'd try to fix Vernon. You'd confront him, warn him, give him chances he'd exploit. She needed you to stay unaware until the trap was already sprung, until Vernon had committed crimes, so blatant that no amount of family loyalty could protect him. She knew me. 41 years of marriage. She knew I'd try to save our son even as he was destroying me. So she'd built the countermeasures in secret, hidden them in a walnut clock and a lawyer's locked drawer, waiting for the day I'd finally understand what she'd understood years ago. Vernon wasn't sick. Vernon wasn't lost. Vernon was exactly who he'd always been, and Estelle had stopped trying to change that truth. She'd simply prepared for it. Quentin slid the dossier across the desk. I stared at the timestamp on the medical evaluation, August 12th, 2022. 14 months before Vernon forced those documents on me in the hotel restroom. Before the first domino even fell, before I'd noticed a single warning sign, Estelle was already 3 moves ahead, building legal fortifications while I was still pretending our family was whole. This is just the first layer, Quentin said quietly. She prepared an entire arsenal, and we're about to deploy every single piece. Quentin turned to the second section of the dossier, his finger tracing a highlighted passage in Texas Estates Code Section 751.0.021, and said the words I'd been waiting to hear since that night in the hotel restroom. The 3 documents your son forced you to sign are legally worthless. I stopped breathing. Estelle embedded a specialized clause. Quentin continued turning the page so I could read the legal language. Under Texas Estates Code Section 751.0.021, any property transfer executed under chemically induced duress automatically self-invalidates upon toxicological proof. The moment you prove lorazepam poisoning, and you will, through that plant's soil, every signature Vernon extracted becomes void. I stared at the statute. The words were dense, technical, the kind of legal language that requires 3 readings to parse. But the meaning was surgical. Chemical coercion destroys consent. Poison decisions aren't decisions. And Vernon had been poisoning me for 11 days straight. The power of attorney, I asked. Void. The assisted living admission. Void. The pension transfer authorization. Void the moment forensic testing confirms lorazepam concentration in that plant's soil. Those 3 signatures in the restroom. My son thought he'd bought my life with a pat on the shoulder and a briefcase full of worthless paper. But there was no transaction. The contract was void before the ink dried. He had nothing. Vernon believes he controls everything, I said quietly. Legally? Quentin replied, he controls nothing. You remain the sole owner of your pension, your medical decisions, and your legal autonomy. The documents he's carrying around like trophies are worth less than the paper they're printed on. I looked at Quentin. What is our first strike? Patience, he said. Estelle's instructions were explicit. Let Vernon believe he's won. Let him commit more crimes. Let him document his own guilt through surveillance footage he thinks is protecting him. The longer he operates under the illusion of control, the deeper he digs his own grave. Quentin turned to the next tab. Another document. Trust certificate notarized dated March 2019. She also established an independent asset trust. Quentin said, total liquidity $340,000. Your wife's music tuition savings over 41 years, plus a term life insurance policy. She maintained separately from your household accounts. $340,000. Estelle had saved that teaching piano lessons to doctors' children, hospital administrators' daughters, the occasional precocious kid from the Heights who showed real talent. $15 an hour, 41 years, compounded into a small fortune I'd never known existed. The trust terms are hard-locked until the conclusion of legal proceedings. Quentin continued. She left explicit instructions. Do not tell him about the money early. He will refuse it out of pride. Wait until he understands the full scope of what she built. Wait until he's ready to use it. Estelle had known me well enough to predict I'd reject help. Known me well enough to delay the revelation until I was desperate enough or angry enough to accept it. Quentin closed the dossier. There's one more person you need to meet. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, coffee shop on Westheimer Corner Booth. His name is Bryce Lancaster. The next morning, I took the bus west on Westheimer, past the boutiques and wine bars to a coffee shop with scratched laminate tables and burnt espresso smell baked into the walls. The kind of place where freelancers work on laptops and retirees read newspapers and nobody looks at anybody else. Bryce Lancaster sat in the corner booth back to the wall facing the door. 55 years old maybe, with thinning brown hair and a faded flannel shirt that had been washed so many times the pattern was barely visible. He looked devastatingly ordinary, the kind of man who could stand in a crowd of 3 and still be invisible. I slid into the booth across from him. He didn't offer his hand, just nodded once and slid an encrypted flash drive across the table. Quentin said you'd be ready for this, Bryce said. His voice was Houston flat, no accent, no inflection. I'm the investigator your wife hired. When I asked, March 2021, 18 months before she died. 18 months. That was 2 months after her diagnosis. While the oncologists were still discussing treatment options, while we were still pretending chemotherapy might work, Estelle had been hiring private investigators. She paid me directly from a blind account established under her maiden name, Bryce continued. No corporate trail, no household transactions, nothing that could be traced back to you or alert Vernon. Clean. I picked up the flash drive. It was warm from his pocket. What's on it? I asked. 18 months of continuous surveillance on Medcrest properties. Vehicle manifests documenting late-night cash transfers. Telephoto photographs of your son meeting with known underground loan sharks. Timestamps, locations, license plates. Every frame she paid for Mr. Harlan. Every hour of footage was commissioned by a dying woman who knew exactly what her son was building. I turned the drive over in my palm. Solid state. Encrypted. Probably 500 gigabytes of evidence my wife had purchased, frame by frame while undergoing aggressive chemotherapy. She told me she might not live to see the prosecution, Bryce said quietly. She said, if I die before Vernon strikes, wait. When he makes his move, you'll know. Then give everything to my husband and tell him I'm sorry I couldn't be there to help him fight. My throat closed. The coffee shop noise espresso machine, hissing conversations, murmuring chairs, scraping tile faded into static. 18 months. While carrying a terminal malignancy, while enduring chemotherapy that made her vomit for hours after each session while still cooking dinner and asking me how my hospital shift went and maintaining the fiction that our family was normal, she was running an intelligence operation against our own son, documenting his crimes, building a prosecution case, preparing weapons I'd need after she was gone. I didn't know whether to weep out of love or out of sorrow. She also said, Bryce added, that you'd try to save Vernon even after seeing all this, that you'd want to give him one more chance. She told me to tell you he's had 41 years of chances. What he's doing now is who he's always been, You just finally have permission to stop pretending otherwise. I sat in that coffee shop booth staring at the encrypted flash drive containing 18 months of my wife's covert surveillance work and realized the full scope of what she'd built. She hadn't just left me breadcrumbs, she'd constructed an entire arsenal. Medical evaluations proving my competency, legal clauses invalidating coerced signatures, a private investigator embedded for 18 months, documenting every crime my son committed while thinking he was invisible. And I was only beginning to discover how deep her preparation went. On October 31st at 3 in the afternoon, 3 men sat around Quentin Mercer's conference table in the law offices on Richmond Avenue. A 68-year-old surgeon, a 62-year-old attorney, and a 55-year-old private investigator staring at an organizational chart of Medcrest properties, pinned to the board like a tactical map of enemy territory. The flash drive sat in the center of the table. Estelle's arsenal. 18 months of surveillance, 847 pages of financial documentation, medical evaluations, legal invalidation clauses, everything she'd built while dying. Now we needed to deploy it with surgical precision. Quentin had printed the organizational chart from Medcrest's public filings. Vernon at the top, Sloan beneath him as CFO. Below them, a network of shell companies, contractors, and silent partners whose names appeared on property deeds but never on tax returns. 4 tiers, Quentin said, tapping his pen against the whiteboard. Tier 1, you continue the performance but sign only dummy documents I prepare. They'll look identical to what Vernon expects, but they contain subtle invalidation language that makes them legally worthless, even if a court somehow overlooks the chemical duress clause. He'll notice, I said. He won't, Bryce interjected. Vernon doesn't read legal language. He skims for signature lines and dollar amounts. I've watched him for 18 months. He treats contracts like terms of service agreements. Scroll to the bottom, click, accept, move on. Quentin continued. Tier 2, Bryce maintains physical surveillance and installs warrant-backed audio monitoring. We need real-time documentation of everything Vernon says and does between now and December 15th. Bryce nodded. I've already secured civil warrants for audio in 3 locations. Vernon's Medcrest office, his vehicle, and the conference room where he holds private meetings. All legal, all admissible. Tier 3. Quentin said, I hand preliminary evidence to the IRS Houston Field Office and FBI White-Collar Crime Division. Not the full arsenal, just enough to initiate formal federal investigation. The 847-page ledger, Estelle's financial documentation, enough to put Vernon on their radar. In Tier 4, I asked. Quentin leaned back in his chair. We wait. For what exactly? The signing ceremony is December 15th, Quentin said. 45 days from today. Vernon is planning a $12 million institutional acquisition gala at the Houstonian Hotel. 400 guests, media coverage, Henderson Capital executives flying in from New York. He's going to put you on stage and have you publicly endorse the deal, transferring your remaining credibility to legitimize his empire. I remembered the hotel, the ballroom, table 14. He wants me there, I said. He needs you there, Quentin corrected. The acquisition requires family approval under Medcrest's corporate charter. You're listed as founding consultant. Without your signature, the deal collapses. Vernon has spent months positioning this. He won't cancel it. He can't. Bryce pulled out a calendar marked with red X's, counting down to December 15th. Your son is rehearsing his final scene, he said quietly. You are perfecting yours. You're acting in the exact same play, but only one of you knows how the curtain falls. I looked at the organizational chart. Vernon's name at the top. My name nowhere on the document except in fine print at the bottom, Founding Consultant 2019. What happens on December 15th? I asked. Quentin smiled. It wasn't pleasant. You refused to sign. In front of 400 witnesses, on camera, with federal agents positioned in the room and your son's entire criminal enterprise documented in real time. You don't just deny him the acquisition, you destroy him publicly, completely, in the exact venue where he humiliated you. I sat back. The conference room was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and distant traffic on Richmond Avenue. 4 tiers, 45 days, 1 final performance. I'll need to sell it, I said. Vernon has to believe I'm declining. If he suspects I'm acting, he'll change the plan. Which is why, Quentin said, sliding a folder across the table, You have a doctor's appointment on November 3rd. Vernon scheduled it. Follow-up cognitive evaluation. You're going to fail it spectacularly. 4 days later, I sat in a sterile examination room at the family practice clinic in Katy, Texas. The paper on the examination table crinkled under my weight. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of antiseptic and latex gloves hung in the air. Lyle Rawlings entered with a clipboard and professional authority that didn't quite mask his discomfort. 48 years old, thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, white coat with his name embroidered on the chest. He'd gained weight since I'd last seen him. Maybe 30 pounds. The kind that comes from sitting at a desk instead of standing in hospital corridors. "Mr. Harlan," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "I'm Dr. Rawlings. Your son asked me to conduct a follow-up cognitive assessment." I blinked slowly, let confusion cross my face. "Doctor," I repeated. "Yes, of course." He sat on the rolling stool, clicked his pen. "Can you tell me what year it is, and where are we right now?" I paused, looked at the ceiling, let my mouth work like I was fishing for words that wouldn't come. "Year," I said slowly. "It's 98. No, wait, 2000. I'm sorry, doctor. What was your name again?" He wrote something on his clipboard. I couldn't see it from the examination table, but I knew what it said. Patient shows signs of progressive cognitive decline. Disorientation to time and person. Recommend continued monitoring. For 30 minutes I performed. Mixed up dates. Forgot his name twice more. Stared blankly at simple arithmetic. Drew a clock face with numbers in the wrong positions. Lyle Rawlings documented everything with messy handwriting that slanted right and looped in the wrong places. The kind of handwriting that had lost him points on every written exam he'd ever taken. He finished the evaluation, closed his folder, and stood. "We'll send the report to your son," he said. "Make sure you're getting enough rest, Mr. Harlan." "Thank you, doctor," I said, letting my voice waver slightly. He left. The door clicked shut. I sat there on the examination table paper, crinkling beneath me, and thought. In the spring of 2003, I graded your final neuroanatomy exam. I gave you an 87 out of 100. My red ink note read, "Lacks attention to critical details." 20 years later, you're writing fraudulent medical evaluations for my son without recognizing that the confused old man sitting in front of you was the chief attending physician who tried to teach you the importance of documentation integrity. I walked out of that clinic into the November sunlight, watching Lyle Rawlings through the window as he typed his fraudulent evaluation into my medical record. 20 years ago, I'd tried to teach him the importance of attention to detail. Today, that same flaw would cost him his medical license. Vernon had bought a compromised witness, but he'd accidentally chosen my own former student. The knock that rattled my door at 7:30 p.m. on November 5th wasn't the rhythmic, controlled tap of my son's welfare checks. It was desperate, frantic, the sound of a man whose world was collapsing and who had nowhere left to run except to the person he'd helped destroy. I opened the door. Neil Sutton stood in the hallway, stripped of his corporate armor. No suit, no tie, just wrinkled jeans and a faded t-shirt. 45 years old, Medcrest's chief financial officer, the man who'd been signing Vernon's fraudulent documents for 4 years. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembled, and he was holding a small encrypted flash drive like it was a grenade. "I need to talk to you," Neil said. His voice cracked. "Please." I stepped aside. He walked into room 214, looked at the surveillance camera in the wardrobe trim, and turned his back to it deliberately. Stood facing the window, overlooking the parking lot. "He wants me to sign off on an $800,000 fraudulent quarterly tax write-off," Neil said, without preamble. "Filed under commercial operating loss. Completely fabricated. I can't. I won't. 4 years I kept quiet because he was paying me $280,000 a year. But this crosses every line I have left." He slammed the flash drive onto my desk. The impact was loud enough that the surveillance camera probably picked it up. "Bus, 4 years of unedited raw double ledgers," Neil continued. "Every fraudulent transaction Medcrest ever executed. Real numbers, real accounts. This is enough to bury him forever. But I need immunity. IRS whistleblower program. Statutory protection. Can your lawyer get me in?" I picked up the drive. It was warm from his pocket. I looked at Neil's hands genuinely trembling, not the performance Vernon had trained into me. This wasn't a trap. This wasn't manipulation. This was pure terror from a man who'd spent 4 years drowning and had finally decided he'd rather face the surface than sink any deeper. "I know who you are," I said quietly. "You're the CFO who signed documents you knew were fraudulent. You enabled my son's crimes for 4 years. You're complicit." Neil's face crumpled. "I know, but you aren't a monster," I continued. "You're just a man who couldn't find the exit doors soon enough. My lawyer will contact the IRS field office tomorrow morning. You will be protected." Neil looked at me like I'd just pulled him from a drowning current. Then he said something I never saw coming. "Sir," he whispered, "in our internal Slack channels, your son explicitly lists you as a liability. There's one email thread from last month you need to read right now." The next morning at 9 o'clock, 4 people gathered around a laptop screen in Quinton's law offices. Me, Quinton, Bryce, and Neil, via encrypted conference line from a secure location Bryce had arranged. The laptop displayed Medcrest's internal communication logs, email chains, Slack messages, encrypted memo threads that Neil had downloaded before his defection. Quinton scrolled through October correspondence, his finger hovering over one particular message. "This one," Neil said through the speaker. "October 12th, 5 days before the gala." Quinton clicked it open. From Vernon Harlan, CEO, to Bryce Hartman, Corporate Counsel. Date, October 12th, 2023, 11:47. PM subject, Asset Management Contingency. Bryce, re our discussion about the old man's non-compliance risk. If he becomes a problem after the signing ceremony, we have options. Consult with our friends at the Riverside Group about a more permanent solution. Keep this off official channels. The room fell into freezing silence. "Riverside Group," Bryce said quietly. "That's the Loan Shark Syndicate. Vernon owes them $340,000. I have 18 months of surveillance showing regular cash payments, missed deadlines, escalating threats." Quinton leaned back in his chair, his face carefully neutral. In federal court, the phrase "permanent solution," within this specific financial context, particularly when referencing known organized crime associates, provides the FBI with immediate grounds for conspiracy to commit murder, indictment under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1117. I stared at the pixels on the screen. 26 characters. More permanent solution. "He wrote this 5 days before the gala," I said, "before he even forced me to sign the documents. He was already planning your murder." Quinton finished. "Yes. Vernon didn't just want your signature. He wanted your signature followed by your death. Clean inheritance. No contested assets. No elderly father who might recover cognitive function and challenge the transfers later." Neil's voice crackled through the speaker. "The Riverside Group doesn't do metaphor. When Vernon says permanent solution to them, they understand it as a contract. I've seen their work before. They make things look like accidents, heart attacks, falls, medication errors." I thought about the lorazepam in my milk, the dosage Vernon had calculated, the plant on my windowsill turning yellow from accumulated poison. They hadn't been trying to make me incompetent. They'd been trying to kill me, slowly, documentably, with medical records showing progressive decline so that when my heart finally stopped, it would look like natural causes following dementia-related deterioration. "How admissible is this email?" I asked. "Extremely," Quinton said. Neil provided it as part of his whistleblower disclosure. He's already filed preliminary protection paperwork with the IRS. The moment they accept his submission, which they will, because his ledgers are pristine, this email becomes federal evidence. The FBI doesn't need a smoking gun when they have a written contract for murder, spelled out in internal corporate communications. Bryce pulled up another window on the laptop. "I've been tracking Vernon's meetings with Riverside Group representatives for 6 months, 3 separate occasions in September and October. The last one was October 11th, 1 day before this email. Vernon met with a man named Marcus Del Vecchio outside a warehouse in the 5th Ward. Del Vecchio is a known enforcer. I have photographs." Quinton closed the laptop. "Conspiracy to commit murder. 26 characters in an email chain, and your son just handed the FBI a federal murder conspiracy charge that carries a minimum of 20 years and up to life imprisonment under federal sentencing guidelines." I sat in that law office conference room staring at the closed laptop and thought of my 4-year-old granddaughter. Ivy, Vernon's daughter, the child who was going to wake up one morning and discover that her father had tried to murder her grandfather, that her mother had poisoned his milk, that her entire family was built on fraud and attempted homicide. She was entirely blameless. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about justice or revenge or reclaiming stolen assets. My son had tried to have me killed, and somewhere in this city, a 4-year-old girl was going to need her grandfather to protect her from the wreckage of her parents' crimes. The audio file loaded on Quentin's laptop at 2 o'clock on November 8th, and when my 4-year-old granddaughter's voice filled the law office through the computer, speakers bright, innocent, playing one of her pretend recording games on her iPad, I had no idea I was about to hear the sound of my own heart breaking. The file had been retrieved from the family iCloud backup through preliminary civil discovery order that Neil Sutton had authorized before his defection. Ivy's iPad automatically uploaded everything to the cloud. Every video, every voice memo, every accidental recording, including this one, recorded Saturday, November 1st at 3:14 p.m. in Ivy's bedroom at the River Oaks house. The timestamp was visible in the metadata. The audio quality was surprisingly clear. "Hello, this is Ivy's show," her small voice announced, slightly muffled like she was speaking into a pillow. "Today I'm going to tell you about, dinosaurs. My favorite is the Triceratops because it has 3 horns and background noise, a door slamming, adult voices from the adjacent master bedroom loud enough to bleed through the wall. Vernon's voice sharp with anger. Why isn't the old man showing symptoms yet? Oh, we're 3 weeks in. He should be stumbling over basic questions by now. Sloane's voice tighter. I've been giving him the dose you specified, 0.5 milligrams daily. Maybe his tolerance... Double it, Vernon interrupted. 1 milligram starting tomorrow. We're running out of time before the signing. Are you insane? Sloane hissed. If toxicology flags it when he's eventually hospitalized, we're done. The forensics will show... He's not going to be hospitalized, Vernon said flatly. He's going to decline quietly in that boarding house room, sign what needs signing, and then nature will take its course. No one investigates an old man with documented dementia dying of cardiac arrest. The voices faded. A door closed. On the recording, Ivy continued talking about dinosaurs, completely oblivious to what had just been captured through her bedroom wall. At the 7:45 timestamp, new audio. Vernon on a phone call pacing in what sounded like his home office. The old man is still sharp somehow, Vernon said to whoever was on the other end. We might need to accelerate the timeline. Talk to your contact at Riverside. See if they have cleaner options. Yeah, call me back. At the 12:10 timestamp, Ivy's voice, again. Quieter now. Speaking directly into her iPad microphone with the clarity that only a 4-year-old's honesty can produce. I miss Grandpa today, she said. He used to read me stories about the moon. Why won't Mommy and Daddy let him come home? Quentin stopped the playback. The law office was absolutely silent. I sat frozen in the leather chair across from Quentin's desk, my hands gripping the armrests, every muscle locked. For 3 weeks, I'd maintained surgical control through humiliation poisoning, murder conspiracy evidence collection. I'd performed dementia-signed dummy documents, poured poison into a plant, and never once broken character. But hearing those 12 words in my granddaughter's voice, why won't Mommy and Daddy let him come home, shattered something inside me that I didn't know could still break. When this empire falls, I said quietly, can I secure absolute legal custody of my granddaughter? Quentin's expression softened. Your wife already built the framework for that, too. Emergency guardianship petition pre-filed. The moment Vernon and Sloane are arrested, you become Ivy's legal guardian. Estelle made sure of it. I closed my eyes. Felt tears I'd been holding back for 3 weeks finally start to surface. Forced them down. Not yet. Not until Ivy was safe. There's one more thing, Quentin said quietly. The final weapon Estelle prepared. I've been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. That moment is now. He unlocked his desk drawer, pulled out a sealed folder marked with Estelle's handwriting, to be opened only when federal evidence is secured. 2 days later, on November 10th at 11 in the morning, I sat in Quentin's office as he unsealed that folder and spread its contents across his mahogany desk. Equity certificates, corporate filing documents, Delaware LLC registration papers. Your wife quietly redirected $180,000 from her personal savings account, Quentin said. 41 years of music teaching. Private lessons at $15 an hour, 5 days a week, compounded and saved. She never touched it. She was waiting. He slid the equity certificates toward me. In March 2019, she instructed me to use those funds to purchase a 34% minority equity stake in Medcrest Properties through a blind Delaware LLC that I manage. Vernon has no idea. It's been sitting dormant for 4 years waiting for this exact moment. I stared at the numbers. 34%. More than a third of the company. Under Texas Business Organizations Code, Section 21.457. Quentin continued, a 34% shareholding block grants you absolute statutory veto rights over any major corporate restructuring or asset acquisition. You can unilaterally block the Henderson Capital deal on December 15th. No lawyer, no court, no corporate maneuver can override it. It's an objective, legally unbreakable kill switch. My hands trembled as I picked up the certificates. The paper was thick, official, embossed with seals and signatures. She bought a third of Vernon's company, I said slowly, using the money he was supposed to inherit, using the savings she accumulated while he was growing up, while she was teaching piano to pay for his college applications, his first car, his wedding. She weaponized his inheritance, Quentin said quietly, turned it into the instrument of his destruction, and she did it 4 years ago, long before Vernon even started his scheme. She saw this coming before he'd made his first move. I looked at the documents spread across the desk, at Estelle's signature on the LLC paperwork, dated March 2019, 4 years ago, 5 months before she died, before Vernon had even formulated his asset seizure plan, before the Gala, before the poison, before any of it. She had seen the future and rewritten it. 34%. My wife quietly bought more than a third of the company our son built, using our stolen money. She never told me, not because she didn't trust me, but because she knew my heart. She knew I would say, "Leave it be, honey. He's our boy. He'll turn around." And she refused to give me the chance to ruin myself with mercy Vernon didn't deserve. I stared at the equity certificates Quentin laid across his desk. 34% of Medcrest Properties, purchased with money Estelle had saved across 4 decades of teaching piano to children in River Oaks living rooms. She had taken our son's weapon and turned it into his destruction. She hadn't just seen the future, she had rewritten it, and I was only now beginning to understand the full scope of the battlefield she'd prepared. For 19 consecutive days, beginning November 11th, I woke at dawn in room 214 and put on the performance of my life, not on a stage or in an operating theater, but in a 120-square-foot boarding house room, under the unblinking eye of a surveillance camera playing the role of a man losing his mind, while mine remained surgeon sharp and counting down to December 15th. Estelle had given me the weapons, the medical evaluation, the legal invalidation clauses, the equity kill switch, but none of it mattered if Vernon suspected I was acting. So I acted. Every day. Every hour. Until the performance became indistinguishable from reality in his eyes. Day 1. November 11th. Vernon arrived at 8 a.m. with milk and toast. I let my hand shake slightly as I took the glass. Took a small sip without swallowing, letting the lorazepam-laced liquid touch my tongue before setting it down. After he left, I poured it into the porcelain plant. The leaves were already starting to yellow. Day 3. November 13th. Vernon brought a document. Pension management authorization, he called it. Transferring control of my retirement disbursements to Medcrest Properties for appropriate allocation and elder care expenses. The language was identical to what he'd forced me to sign in the hotel restroom. But this copy came from Quentin's office, a meticulously prepared dummy containing hidden invalidation clauses embedded in paragraph 7, subsection C, that rendered the entire agreement void if signed under chemical influence or medical duress. Just a simple signature, Father, Vernon said, sliding the gold pen across my desk. This transfers your pension management to us, so you don't have to worry about bills anymore. I picked up the pen with trembling fingers, let my eyes lose focus for 3 seconds. Pension, Which one is this again, son? The retirement account from Houston Methodist, Vernon said patiently. The kind of patience you use with children and the elderly. Remember, you worked there for 35 years. Oh, yes, the hospital. I signed with deliberately poor penmanship, my signature slanting, wrong letters shaky. Perfect evidence of diminished capacity. Perfect evidence of coercion. Vernon took the document, smiled, and left. Day 8, November 18th. Vernon arranged a tour of Sunrise Manor Assisted Living Facility. Wanted me to see where I'd be more comfortable after the December signing ceremony. The facility administrator, a woman in her 50s with corporate smile and clipboard, walked me through common areas, private rooms, medication dispensing stations. I shuffled, slowly asked the same question 3 times, stared blankly at paintings on walls. Vernon signed preliminary admission paperwork in the administrator's office, while I sat in a chair staring out the window at a parking lot. The forms went into his briefcase. More evidence, more documentation of a son carefully managing his declining father's transition to supervised care. Except the forms were worthless. Quentin had already filed counter-documentation with the Texas Department of Aging and Disability Services, establishing my legal competency and documenting Vernon's coercive tactics. I have performed over 2,000 cardiovascular surgeries across 35 years. Every single time I maintained absolute composure, while a human heartbeat inches from my scalpel. That training, that discipline, was the only reason I could sit across from my son sign fraudulent documents, with deliberately shaking hands and never once break character. Day 15, November 26th. Thanksgiving dinner at Vernon's estate, the River Oaks house where I'd lived for 38 years with Estelle, where Vernon had smashed our wedding portraits, where Sloane had dissolved lorazepam into my milk while Estelle's hidden camera recorded everything. They sat me at the head of the table. Vernon carved turkey. Sloane served sides with mechanical efficiency, her face carefully neutral. 4-year-old Ivy sat across from me in a booster seat, playing with mashed potatoes, asking why Grandpa didn't live here anymore. Grandpa needs special help right now, sweetie, Sloane said smoothly. He's staying somewhere he can rest. I smiled at Ivy. Let my eyes be vague, unfocused. Dropped my fork twice. Asked what year it was. Vernon brought me another glass of milk. I pretended to drink it, holding the liquid in my mouth until I could spit it in the bathroom sink. Later, Vernon brought another document to sign. Asset liquidation authorization for my private clinic building in the medical center. The property I'd purchased in 1989, worth $1.4 million in today's market. The dummy version Quentin had prepared would transfer nothing. Vernon believed he was seizing my final asset. I was building his prison sentence one forged signature at a time. Day 19, November 30th. Vernon stepped into room 214 at 8:15 a.m. I was sitting at the desk, pretending to read a newspaper upside down. He set the milk tray on the desk, glanced at me with practiced concern, then his eyes locked onto the windowsill. The porcelain plant, once vibrant green, now completely withered, black, curled leaves brittle as ash. 34 days of lorazepam absorption had killed it exactly the way Vernon intended, the sedative to kill my cognitive function slowly, documentably, with plausible medical cover. Vernon stared at the dead plant for 5 full seconds. Then a slow, smug smile spread across his face. He nodded to himself, satisfaction radiating from every gesture. "You've been drinking your milk every morning, like I asked?" "Haven't you, Father?" he said quietly. "Good. It's important to keep your strength up." He left the room. The lock clicked. I looked at the dead plant, at the blackened soil saturated with 34 days of sedative poison, at the forensic evidence that would become Exhibit A in Vernon's federal murder conspiracy trial. He thought the dying plant proved his father's mind was failing. I knew it proved he'd tried to kill me. That same week, Vernon began parading me on corporate Zoom calls with Henderson Capital Partners. Wanted to project a 3-generation legacy family image. "Here is my father, the spiritual blueprint of Medcrest," he'd announce while I sat in frame, looking confused and frail. 23 days of flawless acting. My son became so emboldened, he introduced me to every Henderson executive he could schedule: senior partners, acquisition specialists, legal counsel. He had no idea every time he put me on camera with a high-profile witness, he was adding another name to the list of people who would testify they saw him parade a poisoned, coerced elderly man as corporate propaganda. On November 21st, Vernon stood in my room, staring at the dead, blackened porcelain plant, with that victorious smile, completely unaware that the withered leaves were absorbing 34 days of lorazepam evidence that would become Exhibit A in his federal murder conspiracy trial. 24 days until December 15th, and Henderson Capital was about to show their hand. The 42nd floor of Henderson Capital's downtown Houston tower offered a sweeping view of the city through floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and when Conrad Bentley gestured for Quentin and me to sit across from his expansive mahogany desk on November 17th, I had no idea I was about to discover that my son's corporate empire had been under federal surveillance for 3 months. Conrad Bentley was 52 graying temples, charcoal suit, the kind of institutional capital that moved billions without breaking a sweat. He'd shaken Vernon's hand at the October Gala, smiled for photographs. Now he sat with the cold precision of a man running a trap. "Dr. Harlan," Conrad began, sliding a folder across his desk. "Our forensic accountants flagged massive irregularities in Medcrest's financial history 3 months ago. Cash flow structuring loops, Delaware shell companies. We ran deeper analysis and contacted the SEC. Quentin leaned forward. "You've been investigating Vernon since August." "Since August," Conrad confirmed. "The $12 million acquisition your son is so eager to sign, it's a sting operation. SEC backed. The exact second he executes that signature on December 15th, we freeze the escrow line hand-unedited ledgers to the Securities and Exchange Commission and trigger an immediate distressed asset acquisition clause under federal securities law." "You're seizing Medcrest," Quentin said. "For $1, Conrad replied. "Not 12 million. $1. Complete forfeiture under criminal enterprise statutes. 100% of holdings transferred to Henderson Capital, then liquidated under SEC supervision." Vernon had been negotiating his own execution for 3 months. "We need your cooperation," Conrad continued. "Internal records, surveillance footage, toxicology evidence. Your documentation makes our federal warrants unbreakable. Can you deliver?" Quentin nodded. 48 hours, complete package." Conrad extended his hand. "Then we have an agreement. December 15th, your son signs his empire over to federal authorities." I shook his hand. The old surgeon in Henderson Capital had never spoken a word before today. We belonged to 2 completely different worlds. I saved lives in operating rooms, he moved billions in boardrooms. Yet we were marching toward the exact same valley from opposite ridges. I called it my wife's orchestration from beyond, even if my medical brain knew how illogical that sounded. 3 nights later, on November 20th, at 11 p.m., I sat alone in room 214 with wire headphones plugged into my phone. The surveillance camera blinked in the wardrobe trim. I'd turned my back to it, facing the window. One file remained on Estelle's micro SD card. Metadata reading, for Roland, 8 minutes, 14 seconds. Audio only. I'd been avoiding it for days. Before I tell you what her voice said to me on that recording, I need to ask if you found a message from someone you loved, who'd passed. Would you listen right away or wait? Comment A if you'd listen immediately. B if you'd need time, and tell me why, in 1 sentence. Please note what follows includes some recreated emotional details for narrative impact. The core truth is what matters. I pressed play. Piano music filled my headphones. Solo piece. The exact melody Estelle played every Sunday evening across our 41 years of marriage. The piece that used to drift through our home while I fell asleep after hospital shifts. She'd never recorded it before. It existed only in her hands in our Sunday evenings. But here it was, preserved, playing through cheap headphones while she lay 7 weeks dead. The piano continued for minutes, the melody I knew by heart, performed with the slight imperfections that made it hers. At the 2:47 timestamp, the piano keys stopped. Silence. Then breathing. Not the breath of health, but the fragile, thin rasp of her final months when pancreatic tumors reached her lungs. Her voice barely above a whisper. "Roland, if you are listening to this, you have unearthed the archive. I always knew you would find it. You are a brilliant surgeon, my love. Your hands never fail." A pause. Labored breathing. "And I need you to know that you are going to be whole. I love you not with passing words, but with 41 years of standing firmly by your side. We built something beautiful. Vernon is not your failure. He made his choices. Another pause. Stand up straight now. Not because you have to be strong for yourself, but because there is a little girl who is going to need her grandfather to protect her. Promise me, Roland. Protect our Ivy. Keep her safe from the wreckage. She's innocent. Remember that. The breathing steadied slightly. I love you. I have always loved you. The piano will finish now. Let it carry you home. The keys resumed. The melody continued for another 5 minutes, then silence. 8 minutes and 14 seconds. I replayed it 3 times in the darkness. Her breathing, her voice, the piano. Then I pulled the headphones from my ears, stared up at the stained ceiling of that boarding house room, and for the first time in 7 weeks since the moment I'd watched her casket lower into Texas soil, I wept. Not out of agony, not out of grief that tore and shredded, out of overwhelming gratitude, out of love, out of the devastating beauty of a woman who'd spent her final breaths recording a message she knew I'd need when the war she'd prepared me to fight finally came. I sat in that 120 square foot room with tears on my face, listening to silence after Estelle's piano faded, and understood what she'd been trying to tell me all along. This wasn't about revenge or justice or even the money. It was about standing up to protect an innocent 4-year-old girl from the wreckage her parents had created, and I would do exactly that. When I spread the personnel files across my desk that Tuesday morning, I didn't expect to find my wife's handwriting in the margins of a document dated 3 weeks before her death. But there it was, faint pencil marks circling the name Craig Hartman, with a single question mark that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about loyalty. Estelle's piano recording had broken something open inside me 3 nights ago. The grief, the purpose, the clarity about protecting Ivy. But the war wasn't finished. More layers remained, more conspirators to expose. Quentin had called at 9:30 that morning. I need you to look at the personnel files Bryce Lancaster pulled from Medcrest's archive, specifically the corporate attorney's billing records. There's something there. I'd driven to his office my own car now, Vernon having reluctantly returned it after I'd signed the dummy pension transfer document. Quentin spread the files across his conference table. Billing statements, email chains, meeting logs. Bryce Hartman, Medcrest's corporate attorney for 15 years. The man Vernon introduced at business dinners as our legal backbone. The professional I'd shaken hands with at the October Gala, assuming he was another victim of my son's deception. He wasn't a victim. He was an architect. The billing records told the story. $340,000 charged to Medcrest over 3 years for regulatory compliance and corporate restructuring. But Quentin's investigation revealed what that language actually meant. Drafting Delaware shell company structures, backdating incorporation filings to evade federal scrutiny, creating the legal architecture that allowed Vernon to launder funds through entities that existed only on paper. He wasn't negligent, Quentin said quietly. He was complicit, actively, deliberately complicit. I flipped through the email chains. Most were technical legal jargon about LLC formations, operating agreements, tax classifications. But one email stopped me cold. From Craig Hartman to Vernon Harlan. Date, October 2nd, 2023. Subject, Your Mother's Questions Containment Strategy. Vernon. Your mother called my office today asking about the Delaware entities and why certain property acquisitions show your father as legal purchaser when he claims no knowledge. She's sharp. I recommended we schedule a meeting to clarify the estate planning structure, which will give us time to prepare consistent messaging. If she continues pressing, we may need to accelerate the timeline we discussed. B.H. October 2nd. 3 weeks before Estelle died. 3 weeks before the pancreatic cancer put her in the hospital for the final time. She'd been trying to save our son, asking questions, seeking truth. And Bryce Hartman, the professional who swore ethical duties to clients, to the law, to basic human decency, had treated her concerns as a containment problem. How many professionals does it take to destroy one woman's trust? A lawyer, a son, a daughter-in-law, each playing their assigned role in a machinery of betrayal. So sophisticated, it required 3 years and a wife's death for me to see its gears. Estelle met with him? I said quietly. Quentin nodded. 1 month before her death. According to Hartman's calendar, they had a 90-minute meeting on September 15th. No notes, no follow-up, just 90 minutes of my time billed at $400 an hour and whatever he told her was convincing enough that she stopped asking Vernon directly. She started building her archive instead, I said. The cameras, the surveillance, the legal countermeasures. She didn't stop investigating, she just went underground. Quentin closed the file. Hartman will lose his license. 15 years of practice gone, and he'll face conspiracy charges alongside Vernon. The email alone proves active participation in elder fraud. 2 days later, on November the 26th, at 2:15 p.m., I sat beside Quentin in a Harris County Courthouse conference room as he opened a sealed envelope containing the forensic signature audit of Medcrest Properties. The audit had been ordered by the IRS as part of their preliminary investigation. Every document Medcrest had filed over 8 years. Property acquisitions, tax returns, corporate amendments, regulatory disclosures analyzed for signature patterns and authorization chains. 147 documents identified as fraudulent or materially misleading. Quentin spread the summary report across the table. I read the numbers. Documents bearing Sloan Harlan's signature as CFO, 146 documents. Bearing Vernon Harlan's signature as CEO1, 146 fraudulent documents signed by my daughter-in-law. One signed by my son, a minor vendor contract from 2016, likely signed before Vernon understood how to insulate himself from liability. The audit included detailed analysis. Vernon had systematically positioned Sloan as the signatory authority on every high-risk document while retaining actual control through verbal directives, encrypted communications, and off-record instructions. She was the legal face. He was the invisible hand. She's the scapegoat, Quentin said quietly. Vernon built her into the perfect legal shield. Every signature is hers. Every authorization bears her name. When federal prosecutors build their case, 99% of the documentary evidence points directly at Sloan. The signature analysis spread before me like an autopsy report. Each inked name a cut, each date a bruise, the whole document a body map of culpability that pointed at one woman, while the true killer stood just outside the frame. She's complicit, I said. She knew what she was signing. Yes, Quentin agreed, but she's also being used. Vernon positioned her as the disposable liability from day one. When this goes to trial, she'll take the majority of the blame, while Vernon's lawyers argue he relied on his CFO's expertise and signatures. I stared at the numbers. 146 signatures. 8 years of fraudulent documents. A daughter-in-law who'd poisoned my milk and watched my humiliation with cold eyes, yet also a woman who'd been systematically positioned as the legal sacrifice in her husband's criminal enterprise. If both parents go to prison, I said slowly, where does Ivy go? Quentin met my eyes. That's the question, isn't it? You destroy Vernon completely. Sloan takes the fall for 99% of the documented fraud, and a 4-year-old girl loses both parents, or you find another way. I didn't answer. There was no good answer. That night at 11:15, my phone lit with an unknown number. I answered on the second ring. Roland, Sloan's voice, stripped of its usual corporate polish, raw, afraid. We need to talk. I said nothing. He's going to let me take everything, she whispered. Every signature, every charge. I've been his CFO for 8 years, and he's positioned it, so I'm the sole defendant on 90% of the counts. But I know where he kept the real records, the ones that prove who gave every order, encrypted files, voice memos, the actual decision trail. I closed my eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because I'll trade them to you, Sloan said. Everything, full cooperation, federal testimony. I'll bury him completely. For one thing, I knew what she'd ask before she spoke. Promise me Ivy won't remember her mother as the villain. I told Sloan I'd think about it, ended the call. But I didn't need to think I'd already made the decision the moment she mentioned Ivy's name. A child doesn't choose her parents. A child doesn't deserve to carry their crimes. If Sloan's evidence could bury Vernon completely, while giving a 4-year-old girl one parent who might eventually see daylight, I'd make that trade. But first there were final pieces to position. The photograph on Renee Dalton's laptop screen showed a man I barely recognized my own face. 70 years compressed into a mask of confusion, while my daughter-in-law held out wet wipes like I'd soiled myself at table 14. We sat in a diner booth in Midtown Houston on December 1st, 10 a.m. Quentin. Beside me Renee across the table with her laptop open. She was 43 investigative journalist for the Houston Chronicle, Dark hair pulled back, no makeup, the kind of reporter who'd spent 20 years documenting corporate malfeasance that destroyed ordinary people. I've been tracking Medcrest properties for 6 months, Renee said, scrolling through her archive. Fraudulent foreclosures, predatory lending, shell company structures. But I needed the human cost, the face behind the fraud. Then I saw you at that gala. She clicked to another photograph, me isolated at table 14. Vernon's back turned at table 1, Sloane watching with cold calculation. I don't need your son's financial crimes, Mr. Harlan, Renee said quietly. I need the cost, what it looks like when a family cannibalizes itself for profit. You want to photograph a public execution, I said. Renee met my eyes. I want to document the moment accountability has a face. December 15th. I'll have a Chronicle photographer embedded in that ballroom, with press credentials Vernon can't block. When you refuse to sign when the FBI moves in when his empire collapses, I want that captured. Front page, above the fold. The image Houston sees the next morning. Seeing yourself humiliated through a stranger's lens is like reading your own autopsy report, while still breathing every clinical detail accurate, every measurement proof you were alive when the cutting began. You'll have your photographer, I said. 2 days later, on December 3rd at 3 p.m., I walked into Lyle Rawlings' family practice clinic in Katy. The receptionist tried to stop me. I walked past her, pushed open the door to his private office, and sat in the chair across from his desk. Lyle looked up startled. 48 years old. The physician who'd written my fraudulent cognitive evaluation, Dr. Harlan. You gave me an 87 in neuroanatomy 20 years ago, I said calmly. Spring 2003. Your final rotation before residency. I wrote in red ink, lacks attention to detail. You were right then. You're worse now. His face went pale. I slid a folder across his desk. This is the certified neurological evaluation from 14 months ago, proving I'm fully competent. This is the toxicology analysis of the porcelain plant, showing lorazepam concentration. This is the timeline of my son's coercion. And this is the state medical board complaint I'll file tomorrow, unless you revoke your fraudulent diagnosis and sign a notarized affidavit detailing exactly how Vernon threatened you. Lyle's hands trembled. He said he'd file a malpractice suit that would end me. I have 3 children in college. I couldn't... Now you'll sign the truth, I interrupted, or I'll file the suit he threatened you with. Your choice. You have 60 seconds. He signed, tears streaming down his face. The notary I'd brought witnessed it. Lyle Rawlings' medical license would survive barely, but his complicity was now documented, time-stamped, and admissible. 9 days later, on December the 12th, at 4 p.m., I sat in Quentin's law office conference room with the final war counsel. Quentin at the head of the table. Bryce Lancaster, 55 crew, cut the private investigator who had spent 18 months embedded in Medcrest's orbit and now coordinated directly with the FBI white-collar crimes division as their field liaison. Neil Sutton, from IRS Criminal Investigations, 47 accountant-turned-agent, the man who'd freeze Vernon's accounts. Final positions, Quentin said. FBI establishes perimeter outside the ballroom at noon December 15th. Plain clothes. No uniforms until after the refusal. Bryce nodded. We'll have 6 agents positioned, 3 at exits, 3 mobile. IRS freeze order is signed, Neil added. Effective 12:01 p.m. December 15th. Every Medcrest account, every shell company, every asset frozen simultaneously. Henderson Capital triggers acquisition at signature. Quentin continued. Chronicle photographer is credentialed. I control AV network access. Roland ascends stage and refuses publicly. Then Vernon breaks, Bryce said, and we move in. There's one complication, Neil said quietly. He slid a document across the table. Vernon filed an event permit with the venue. Special addendum for family remarks, including minor child Ivy Harlan, age 4 for stage appearance. The room went silent. He's going to bring Ivy on stage, I said flatly. Bryce looked grim. Using his own daughter as a human shield. If she's standing next to him when you refuse, when the FBI moves in, she won't be, I said. Quentin leaned forward. How? What kind of father brings his 4-year-old daughter on stage to shield himself from accountability? And what kind of grandfather prepares to detonate that stage anyway? I've arranged extraction, I said. Someone Vernon trusts. Someone who'll take Ivy out of that ballroom before I speak my first word. She won't see it. She won't remember it. She'll be safe. Neil frowned. Who? I didn't answer. Some cards you hold close. The meeting ended. Plans finalized. 3 days until execution. That night I stood in my home office, the one I'd reclaimed, after Quentin filed preliminary custody papers, beside the dead ficus plant Estelle had kept alive for 19 years. The leaves were brown brittle, curled like paper in a fire. I'd brought it home from room 214. Evidence. Memorial. Reminder. I spoke aloud to her absence. He's going to put Ivy in front of the cameras, love. He's going to make her watch me destroy him. I touched the dead leaves. They crumbled under my fingers. So I called the one person who can take her out of that room before the first word leaves my mouth. The one person Vernon will never suspect is working with me. The ficus didn't answer. But I felt Estelle there anyway, in the silence, in the certainty, in the knowledge that I was doing exactly what she'd prepared me to do. 3 days until December 15th. 3 days until I stood on that stage and refused my son in front of 400 witnesses. 3 days until a 4-year-old girl's life changed forever, and I made damn sure she was somewhere safe when it happened. The valet's face when I stepped from the car in my 1987 surgical scrubs, pale green name embroidered in fading navy thread, told me everything I needed to know about how tonight would begin. His mouth opened-closed, then settled into the careful neutrality of someone witnessing a train derailment in real time. "Good evening, sir." He managed eyes fixed somewhere above my left shoulder. I handed him the keys to my rental sedan. Behind me, the Hostonian Hotel rose against the December sky like a monument to everything my son believed he'd built. 400 guests would fill the grand ballroom tonight. 400 witnesses to Vernon Harlan's coronation as Houston's Medical Entrepreneur of the Year, the same stage where he'd destroyed me 2 months ago. The difference was that tonight I dressed for the occasion. The scrubs hung loose on my frame. I had been broader through the shoulders in 1987 before age, and the weight of these past 2 months softened my frame. The fabric still held the faint chemical tang of old hospital laundry detergent, pulled from the storage unit where I'd kept the last remnants of Estelle's things. She'd folded these scrubs herself back when I still took emergency room rotations, back when our family still cared about healing instead of profit margins. I pushed through the brass-handled doors at precisely 6 o'clock. The grand ballroom's pre-reception area buzzed with Houston's medical elite department heads, pharmaceutical representatives, the same faces who'd watched me sign away my inheritance at table 14. Conversations stuttered into silence as I walked past. A woman in a black cocktail dress actually gasped. Then I saw Vernon. He stood near the bar, mid-laugh, with a Harris County judge champagne flute raised. The laughter died when his eyes found me. For 3 seconds I counted them. My father's carefully constructed mask slipped. His face went absolutely white. The champagne flute trembled in his hand. Recognition hit him like a fist. He knew these scrubs. He knew what they meant. But Vernon Harlan hadn't built a $100 million medical empire by showing weakness in public. The mask snapped back into place. His smile returned sharp as a scalpel, and he raised his glass toward me in mock salute, before turning back to the judge, as if I were merely another guest in questionable attire. I scanned the room with purpose. Quentin Mercer stood near the silent auction tables, examining a golf package with studied disinterest. His gray suit blended perfectly with the corporate crowd. Our eyes met for half a second. He touched his tie, the signal. FBI agents positioned. Conrad Bentley from the SEC had stationed himself by the north entrance phone to his ear, playing the distracted executive. Near the stage, I spotted Renee Dalton, the Chronicle journalist, her photographer already circling the room with practiced casualness. Every piece exactly where it needed to be. Sloan arrived at 6:40. She wore the same pearl gray dress she'd worn to our rehearsal dinner 14 years ago, the one Vernon had called too modest for a Harlan bride. Ivy walked beside her in a white dress with blue ribbons clutching her mother's hand. My granddaughter's face lit up when she saw me, but Sloan squeezed her hand gently, the signal they'd practiced. Ivy's smile faded into careful composure. 4 years old and already learning to hide her heart from dangerous men, Sloane's eyes found mine across the room. She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge me beyond the briefest nod, but her left hand moved to her purse, the one containing Ivy's iPad with the evidence we needed. She was ready. We all were. She was ready. We all were. Dinner service began at 7. I sat at table 23, deliberately positioned in Vernon's sightline. He couldn't ignore me, couldn't pretend I wasn't there watching every movement, every calculated smile, every handshake with the men who'd helped him steal my life. Between the salad course and the entree, Brisa Lancaster slid into the empty seat beside me. "Your father's nervous," he said quietly, adjusting his napkin. "He sent Craig Hartman to check the side exits twice." "Good," I said. Bryce's phone buzzed. He glanced down, then back at me. "IRS confirmed. Neil Sutton delivered the Henderson Capital files 20 minutes ago. If Vernon tries to run those funds tonight, they'll have him before he reaches the parking lot." The entree arrived beef Wellington because Vernon always chose beef Wellington. I didn't touch it. My stomach had coiled into something too tight for food. At 7:15, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The evening's MC, some local television anchor whose smile could sell poison, as Springwater took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce this year's Medical Entrepreneur of the Year, Dr. Vernon Harlan." Applause thundered through the ballroom. Vernon rose from table 1, waving like visiting royalty, making his way to the stage, with the slow confidence of a man who'd never doubted his own victory. He took the microphone, waited for silence. "Thank you," he began, voice rich with practiced humility. "This honor belongs not to me alone, but to 3 generations of Harlan dedication to Houston healthcare." My hands clenched beneath the table. "In fact," Vernon continued, smile widening, "I'd like to invite my family to join me on stage. The future of Harlan Medical starts here." Sloane Ivy. The spotlight swung to table 1. Sloane stood slowly, Ivy's hand in hers. They walked toward the stage with careful steps. Vernon extended his hand, pulling them into the light. Ivy looked so small up there, so terribly small. "And my son Vernon," said voice carrying across 400 silent witnesses. "Roland Harlan." The spotlight found me at table 23. Every eye in the ballroom turned, waited. I stood. The surgical scrubs rustled softly. Somewhere near the bar, someone whispered. The sound carried like falling glass. I walked toward the stage. Vernon's smile never faltered, but his eyes promised murder. I climbed the stairs into the light, each step carrying the weight of 2 months and 18 years, and every silent meal where my son had taught me that weakness was unforgivable. He extended the microphone toward me, arm steady, smile untouchable. Ivy stood 10 feet away, white dress bright under the spotlights, watching me with her grandmother's eyes. 400 witnesses held their breath. I took the microphone from my son's hand. The microphone's weight in my hand was 8 ounces of surgical steel, familiar, precise. The last instrument I'd hold before the cut that could not be reversed. 400 faces stared up at me. Vernon stood 3 feet to my left, smile-frozen, champagne-polished confidence cracking at the edges. Sloane held Ivy's hand near the stage-left banner, my granddaughter's white dress bright under the spotlights. I didn't speak yet. Instead, I found Claire Brennan at the rear of the ballroom, standing beside the courtyard doors, exactly where I'd told her to wait. She was 26, honey blonde, the professional childcare provider Vernon had hired to manage Ivy during tonight's event, never suspecting I'd contacted her 48 hours ago with a very different job description. Our eyes met across 400 witnesses. I raised my left hand to my temple, 2 fingers, the old surgical gesture for incision point, then pointed toward the hallway exit. Claire moved instantly. She crossed the ballroom floor with the easy confidence of someone following rehearsed choreography, weaving between tables toward the stage. Guests tracked her movement with mild curiosity. She climbed the stage stairs, knelt beside Ivy with a conspirator's smile, and whispered something I couldn't hear but had scripted word for word 2 days ago. "Sweetheart," Claire said, voice carrying just enough for nearby tables. "The courtyard has special lights, just for you. Let's see them before they turn off." Ivy's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Real fireworks, Miss Claire. The most beautiful ones," Claire promised, extending her hand. My granddaughter took it without hesitation. They descended the stage steps together, Ivy practically bouncing with excitement, Claire guiding her down the center aisle toward the rear exit. The room watched with indulgent smiles, another charming detail of Vernon Harlan's perfect family tableau. Vernon finally understood. His head snapped toward me, eyes wide with trapped animal panic. "What did you just—" He caught himself, lowered his voice to a sharp whisper. "Dad, where is she going?" I watched Ivy's white dress disappear through the courtyard doors. 30 seconds. That's all I'd needed. Extracting a child from a stage before destroying her father is like removing healthy tissue before excising the tumor. Necessary, precise, the only mercy surgery allows. Claire Brennan Vernon's own trusted employee had just executed the extraction my son would never see coming. The ally I'd refused to name. The one person Vernon had vetted, approved paid to keep Ivy safe tonight. Irony sharp enough to draw blood. Vernon recovered his smile for the watching crowd, but his hand trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a leather portfolio, the $12 million Medcrest transfer agreement, already prepared, already assuming my surrender. He extended it toward me with a gold ceremonial pen, the kind given to men who sign their souls away in public. "Roland," he said, voice carrying the warmth of a eulogy, "if you'd like to say a few words before we make this official." I placed the pen on the podium. The click of gold against wood carried across the silent ballroom like a gavel. Then I leaned into the microphone. "I did not ascend the stage to sign your contract," I said, voice steady as a scalpel, "but to return the harvest of what you have sown." The collective gasp hit like oxygen leaving the room. Vernon's face drained white. "Dad, don't. You dare. You don't know what you're—" I looked past him toward the AV booth at the ballroom's rear. Quentin Mercer stood behind the sound engineer hand, already on the controls. I gave him the smallest nod. The 20-foot LED wall behind the stage cut to black. 400 people held their breath. Then the screen erupted with light. The first image showed Sloane in our kitchen. My kitchen, the one I'd paid for with 18 years of sweat, crushing white tablets into powder. The timestamp read October 8th, 2023, 6:47 a.m. She dissolved the powder into a glass of milk with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done it before. The camera angle was tight, clear, irrefutable. The image shifted. Vernon in my childhood home. Face twisted, with rage, smashing family portraits against the hardwood floor. Glass exploded in slow-motion silence. Then he moved to the master bathroom, my mother's bathroom, and held her platinum wedding ring over the toilet bowl. The ring Estelle Harlan had worn for 38 years. He dropped it, flushed, watched it spiral down with dead eyes. Someone in the ballroom screamed. The screen split into 3 panels. Left panel, Delaware Shell Company. Flowchart, Henderson Capital's name highlighted in red arrows, pointing to Medcrest Holdings, then to Vernon's personal accounts. $8 million traced through 6 layers of corporate camouflage. Center panel. Forged IRS documents with Vernon's signature. Neil Sutton's signature dates, altered tax fraud laid bare in 12-point font. Right panel email. Vernon's personal account. Subject line in all caps. Permanent solution required. Body text visible for 3 seconds long enough to read, "Eliminate Roland's legal standing. Cognitive decline diagnosis. Full asset transfer before Christmas." The LED wall showed my son flushing my wife's wedding ring down a toilet. 400 people saw it in the same instant I did. Some truths land like diagnosis, immediate, irrevocable, changing everything that comes after. The ballroom fractured. Guests erupted from tables, shouting, pointing cameras, swarming toward the stage like sharks scenting blood. Renee Dalton's photographer moved with professional precision lens capturing every angle. Conrad Bentley from the SEC pushed through the crowd phone already to his ear. Vernon stood frozen, mouth open, no words coming. The evidence looped, over and over. Sloane poisoning, Vernon destroying, fraud, forgery, permanent solution. Bryce Lancaster moved through the chaos like a blade through water, 2 federal agents flanking him. He climbed the stage stairs with the measured calm of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Vernon Harlan Sloane. Harlan. He called, voice cutting through the pandemonium. "Federal agents, remain where you are," hands visible. Vernon's face on that stage, captured by 8 cameras projected on the screen behind his own collapsing evidence, was the face of a man watching his kingdom burn with the arsonist holding his father's lighter. Sloane grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the stage-left exit heels, clicking in desperate rhythm. Bryce Lancaster's voice dropped to absolute zero. "Federal agents, you are both under arrest." Sloane's face when she saw her own signature replicated 146 times. On the 20-foot screen, each one a bullet she'd signed her name to, each one aimed at her own head. While her husband stood behind the trigger was the exact moment a scapegoat realizes she's been branded for slaughter. The LED wall cycled to a new display. Forensic signature analysis. Left column documents bearing Sloane's name as Chief Financial Officer. Corporate fraud. Tax evasion, securities, manipulation, shell company, registration. 146 separate federal violations across 8 years. Right column documents bearing Vernon Harlan's signature on the same transactions. 0. Absolute 0. Sloane stared at the screen like a woman watching her own autopsy. Her mouth opened. No sound came. Vernon spun toward the AV booth, face purple with rage. "Cut the feed!" he screamed at the stagehands below. "Cut it now, or you're all—" But Quentin had already severed their control. The evidence looped with mechanical precision. Sloane turned slowly toward Vernon, comprehension settling over her features like frost. 8 years of her professional life weaponized as his liability shield. Every signature she'd added to documents he'd verbally instructed her to process. Trusting her husband, trusting Medcrest's corporate counsel, trusting that family meant protection instead of premeditated sacrifice. She'd been his designated defendant from the beginning. Her hand moved to the small lapel microphone clipped to her dress collar, the one Vernon's event coordinator had attached for family remarks. She pulled it close to her lips. Her voice carried across the ballroom speakers with terrifying calm. "You used my name to take your bullets while you hid behind our daughter." The ballroom went dead silent. Vernon's face drained white. "Sloane, don't you dare! We had an agreement. We planned this together." "Everything you told me was verbal," she said into the microphone, words clear as breaking glass. "Every signature was mine." She walked across the stage. 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet. Sloane Harlan stopped beside me, turned to face Vernon together, shoulder to shoulder, under the spotlights and the looping evidence of her professional execution. Public defection before 400 witnesses. She looked at me for the first time in 2 months. Her eyes were dry, empty, the eyes of someone who'd already calculated the cost. "I brought you the encrypted files 3 days ago," she said quietly, just loud enough for the front tables to hear. "The offshore accounts, the Delaware registrations, everything he told me couldn't be traced. 3 days ago, December 12th, the night I'd refused to tell Quentin who would extract Ivy from the stage. Sloane had been my second ally all along. Not redemption, not maternal instinct, just cold arithmetic trading, witness cooperation for reduced sentencing, saving herself from the shipwreck her husband had engineered around her professional credentials. How long does it take for a 38-year marriage to collapse into evidence? 8 years of signatures, 3 minutes of screen time, 1 microphone, and a daughter-in-law who finally understood. She was never the CFO. She was the designated defendant. Vernon lunged toward her. Bryce Lancaster moved faster. The house lights slammed to full brightness, turning the grand ballroom from theatrical showcase into crime scene documentation. Ballroom doors exploded open from 3 entrances simultaneously left, right, center aisles. 6 FBI agents in tactical vests converged on the stage like a surgical team executing a rehearsed procedure. 2 IRS agents followed, federal warrants already drawn. The lead FBI agent, mid-40s, crew-cut face carved from granite, climbed the stage stairs and walked straight toward Vernon. He picked up Vernon's fallen microphone from the podium. "Vernon Harlan," he said, voice amplified across the entire ballroom, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and elder abuse under federal statute. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Vernon tried to pull away. 2 agents grabbed his arms. Vernon twisted, kicked, screamed into the microphone, still broadcasting every word. "My father set me up. He poisoned himself. This is entrapment." They slammed him face first onto the hardwood stage. The sound carried like a gunshot. Vernon's cheek hit the floor where he'd stood in triumph. 90 seconds ago, arms wrenched behind his back, chrome handcuffs snapping closed around his wrists with the practiced efficiency of agents who'd done this 1,000 times. 8 cameras captured every angle. 400 witnesses watched the king bleed. Watching federal agents handcuff your son on a stage is like watching surgery from the wrong side of the glass. You know the outcome is necessary. You performed the incision yourself, but the blood is still his, and you're still his father. I felt absolutely nothing. Sloane extended her wrists toward the nearest agent without being asked. No resistance, no tears, just the mechanical compliance of someone who'd already accepted the mathematics of consequence. They cuffed her with professional courtesy. Mrs. Harlan, the female IRS agent, said quietly, "Your cooperation will be noted in our report." Across the ballroom, I watched Craig Hartman, Medcrest's corporate attorney, the man who'd crafted every fraudulent document, who'd sat beside Vernon at table 1 tonight, like a trusted advisor, try to slip toward the side exit. 2 IRS agents cornered him at table 12. He went down without a fight, hands behind his head, the last rat, abandoning a ship already underwater. Conrad Bentley from the SEC stood near the north entrance, fastening his coat with the satisfied calm of a man whose 18-month operation had just concluded exactly as planned. Henderson Capital's acquisition attempt, the $12 million SEC sting, executed perfectly. He caught my eye across the chaos, nodded once, then walked into the December night with a briefcase full of evidence that would bury what remained of Medcrest's financial corpse. On stage, they hauled Vernon to his knees. His expensive suit was rumpled torn at the shoulder. His face was pressed against the stage floor 30 seconds ago. Now it was wet with tears and rage and the absolute collapse of a man who'd believed himself untouchable. The same stage where he'd orchestrated my public humiliation 2 months ago. The same ballroom where he'd planned his coronation as Houston's Medical Entrepreneur of the Year. The same spotlights that had illuminated his victory now documented his destruction. Vernon Harlan, CEO of Medcrest. Properties knelt on the grand ballroom stage in chrome handcuffs, with 8 cameras documenting his collapse and 400 witnesses watching the king bleed. I stood 6 feet away in my surgical scrubs, debt paid in full. The sound that broke through the ballroom chaos wasn't a federal agent or a journalist, or Vernon's voice. It was the small gasp of a 4-year-old child who'd just walked back into a room that no longer contained her parents. Ivy stood in the rear doorway, Claire Brennan's hand on her shoulder, white dress still perfect. She'd missed everything. The evidence, the arrests, the collapse of her father's kingdom. Claire had kept her word. Courtyard lights. Enough distraction to shield a child from watching her parents dragged away in handcuffs. But the ballroom Ivy returned to was unrecognizable. Scattered chairs, yellow federal tape across the stage, guests streaming toward exits, phones raised, FBI agents processing evidence, the LED wall still looping footage on silent repeat. Ivy's eyes scanned the wreckage with careful focus. "Miss Claire," she said, voice very small, "where's Mommy? Where's Daddy?" Claire knelt beside her, opened her mouth to answer, but Ivy wasn't looking at her anymore. The child's gaze swept past the federal agents, past the journalist, past the scattered evidence, and locked onto the stage where I stood alone in my surgical scrubs. She didn't call for Sloane, didn't search for Vernon. Her entire focus narrowed to one point across 60 feet of chaos. "Grandpa," the word cut through the noise like a scalpel. Ivy broke from Claire's hand and ran. 4 years old, 38 pounds, white dress flying behind her. She dodged around equipment cases, ducked under yellow tape, sprinted down the center aisle past tables, where Houston's medical elite had watched her father's destruction. She didn't stop at the stage stairs, just climbed them with desperate determination. I dropped to my knees as she reached me. Ivy threw her arms around my waist and locked them with ferocious strength, face buried against the pale green surgical scrubs. I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her close, bending until my face pressed into her hair. She weighed 38 pounds, smelled like hotel courtyard jasmine and child's shampoo. And in that exact moment, I understood why Estelle's last recorded words were to protect her. This was the only soul worth saving from the wreckage. "I've got you, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair, voice breaking. "I've got you. You're safe now." Ivy's grip tightened. "Don't let go." "Never." The surgical detachment I'd carried for 8 weeks, the clinical precision that had let me build federal cases and watch my son handcuffed without flinching, shattered completely. I was 68 years old, kneeling on a ballroom stage in vintage surgical scrubs, holding my granddaughter while federal agents processed evidence 20 feet away. And I felt everything. Every betrayal. Every forged signature. Every drop of lorazepam dissolved into milk. Every lie Vernon told while Sloane poisoned me. But more than that, I felt Ivy's heartbeat against my chest. Felt her small hands fisted in fabric. Felt the desperate trust of a child who'd walked into chaos and chosen me over missing parents. She'd chosen me. 2 months of separation, 2 months of Vernon's manipulation. None of it had severed what Estelle had built between us in 4 years of Tuesday afternoons and bedtime stories. My granddaughter knew who would protect her when everything else collapsed. Holding your granddaughter while federal agents process your son's arrest 20 feet away is like performing surgery in a burning building. You can't stop. The flames can't save the structure, but you can carry one living thing through the smoke to safety. Across the ballroom, I saw Renee Dalton raise her camera. The shutter fired. Once, twice, 3 times. She lowered the camera, met my eyes across the chaos, and nodded with professional satisfaction. Not the arrest, not the evidence, not Vernon on his knees in handcuffs. This old man in vintage scrubs kneeling on a stage holding a 4-year-old who'd run to him through federal crime scene tape. The photograph that would reframe everything. What began as a corporate fraud prosecution would transform by morning into something else entirely. A grandfather's protective rescue, a child saved from corrupt parents, an old surgeon who had to dismantle his own son's empire to preserve an innocent soul. Revenge becomes salvation when you change the camera angle. Bryce Lancaster approached the stage stairs, movements careful. "Dr. Harlan," he said quietly, "we'll need your formal statement downtown. Tonight or tomorrow morning." I didn't lift my face from Ivy's hair. "Tomorrow. Child Protective Services will need to arrange temporary custody. Given the circumstances, if you're willing..." "She stays with me," I said, not a request. Bryce nodded. "I'll make the calls." He walked away, leaving us alone on the stage. Ivy pulled back just enough to look at my face. Her eyes, Estelle's eyes, searched mine with terrible 4-year-old perception. "Are you sad, Grandpa?" I touched her cheek. "No, sweetheart, I'm not sad. Where did Mommy and Daddy go? How do you explain federal arrest to a 4-year-old? How do you tell a child that her grandfather engineered her parents' destruction to save her from systematic poisoning? You don't, not tonight. They had to go away for a while," I said carefully. "But you're going to stay with me. Is that okay?" Ivy considered this with serious focus. Then she wrapped her arms around my neck and buried her face against my shoulder. "Okay." Renee Dalton's camera had captured everything. By morning, that image would tell the city the truth. By morning, that image would rewrite the entire story. But kneeling there with Ivy's heartbeat against my chest, I realized I'd been wrong about what I felt destroying Vernon. It wasn't nothing. It was the exact price required to hold this child and know she'd never be poisoned, defrauded, or erased. The Houston Chronicle front page arrived on my doorstep, December 16th at 6:14. A.M. Renee Dalton's photograph above the fold, my face buried in Ivy's hair, and beneath it 3 words in 72-point, Helvetica, elder abuse exposed. I stood barefoot on cold concrete, holding newsprint that would rewrite everything. The photograph captured it perfectly. Old man in vintage surgical scrubs kneeling on a stage holding a 4-year-old who'd chosen him over missing parents. The headline beneath told the story Houston would remember: money laundering, tax fraud, attempted murder, son arrested, grandfather gains custody. Inside, Ivy still slept in Estelle's old sewing room. My granddaughter had asked for her mother twice yesterday. Cried once, then accepted my careful explanations with the terrible adaptability of children who've learned that adults sometimes disappear. I folded the newspaper and walked back inside. My phone rang at 8:47 a.m. Quinton. "Henderson Capital closes the acquisition in 13 minutes. Conrad wanted you to know before it hits the wire." "How much?" $1. Silence. "Roland, I heard you. I'm sorry." I hung up. At 9:03 a.m., Conrad Bentley called. "The acquisition is complete, Dr. Harlan. 100% of Medcrest properties under Texas. UCC Article 9, Distressed Asset Provisions. For $1. Legally, that's the maximum value of a criminal enterprise under federal forfeiture statutes." A pause. "Your initial investment is classified as proceeds of a fraudulent enterprise. Unrecoverable. 41 years, $3 million, $1. Watching your life's work sell for $1 is like performing a flawless surgery for 40 years and discovering the patient was dead before you made the first incision. Every decision, sound, every suture perfect, and none of it mattered, because the outcome was predetermined by someone else's poison. Thank you for the call, Mr. Bentley." I hung up before he could offer condolences. 3 days later, December 19th, Quinton and Bryce Lancaster laid a federal sentencing worksheet across the conference table between us. "Your son enters federal custody at 41, Bryce said quietly. conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering under 18 U.S.C. 1956 securities fraud tax, evasion elder exploitation under Texas Penal Code 32.55 grand forgery. Federal guidelines stipulate 25 to 35 years. Best case parole at 66. Worst case 76 if his cardiovascular system survives incarceration. Vernon had my build. I was 68 now, the exact age where the stress of these past months could test a man's cardiac limits. 25 years in federal prison wouldn't just age my son. It would test whether he'd inherited the same vulnerabilities he tried to exploit in me. Sloan received 6 to 8 years with early parole eligibility, Bryce continued. Her full cooperation triggers reduced sentencing approximately $462,000 in IRS whistleblower recovery. Craig Hartman receives permanent disbarment, plus 5 to 7 years federal, Quinton added. Texas Bar filed emergency proceedings yesterday. The porcelain plant from room 214 Bass, Bryce said, pulling the forensic report. Lorazepam at 11 times therapeutic concentration. Proof of method timeline and intent. It cements the attempted murder chain. The plant had absorbed what I'd been drinking, yellowing and dying while I collected the evidence that would bury my son. Arraignment, January 8th, Bryce said. Both defendants in federal custody without bail. I nodded. Quentin studied my face. Roland, are you? I'm fine. You don't look fine. I'm fine, I repeated, but I wasn't. That night I did the math while Ivy slept. Vernon enters prison at 41 best case parole at 66 older leaving than I was burying my wife. I felt nothing about that and wondered when the numbness would finally break or whether this was simply what justice felt like when you performed it yourself. The Harris County Family Courthouse smelled like floor wax and legal finality, and I wondered if Ivy understood that this hearing would decide whether she'd ever see her parents outside visiting hours again. 7 days since Vernon's arrest. The numbness hadn't broken yet. Quinton met me in the limestone corridor. The social worker filed her report this morning. It's favorable. Courtroom 3. B. At 10 a.m. Judge Margaret Holloway presiding, mid-50s, steel-gray hair, the weathered competence of 2 decades, arbitrating which parent gets Christmas. She reviewed the file. Vernon Harlan, federal custody. Roland Harlan, petitioner for emergency grandparent conservatorship under Texas Family Code 153.433. Dr. Harlan, both biological parents are currently incarcerated on federal charges. Yes, Your Honor. The minor child, Ivy Harlan, age 4, has been residing with you since December 15th. Yes, Your Honor. Social worker Amanda Cruz took the stand, early 30s. Navy Blazer County Family Services ID clipped to her collar. She'd visited my home twice, watched Ivy eat breakfast, asked careful questions about sleeping arrangements. When asked where she feels safest, Amanda read from her transcript. The child responded, Grandpa's house. He makes breakfast like Grandma Estelle showed him. Something cracked in my chest. Not the numbness breaking, just a fracture small enough to ignore. Dr. Harlan, you're 68 years old, Judge Holloway said. Physical and financial capacity to raise a 4-year-old whose parents may be incarcerated for 6 to 35 years. I do, Your Honor. My late wife's sewing room is already Ivy's bedroom. I'm financially stable. My physician cleared my cognitive and physical competency 3 weeks ago. The gavel fell like a bone breaking. Petition granted. Permanent managing conservatorship to paternal grandfather, pending parental rights review, 18 months post-sentencing. Ivy was mine. Not visiting rights, not temporary guardianship. Mine. I closed my eyes and exhaled 7 weeks of held breath. 3 days later, December the 26th, Quentin slid a sealed folder across his desk. Estelle executed this 4 years ago, instructed not to open it unless parental incapacitation via criminal conviction. The conditions triggered December 15th. Trust documentation. Estelle Marie Harlan grantor. The sealed folder contained the full asset breakdown Estelle never shared with me until now. The $340,000 we discussed here was exactly how she built it. $180,000 from 41 years of private music tuition, $5 per lesson, every penny saved. The remaining $160,000 from a term life insurance policy maintained entirely in her maiden name, completely separate from our household accounts. Primary beneficiary, Roland Harlan, lifetime. Contingent beneficiary, Ivy Harlan, absolute private school tuition, university funding $1,200 monthly until age 25, triggered the moment her parents went to prison. I turned to the final page. Handwritten addendum in Estelle's jade green Waterman script. Dated March 14th, 2019, 3 weeks after Ivy's christening, 57 months before Vernon's arrest. Innocent child carries zero blame for failures of adults who made her. Keep her safe, Roland. Protect what we can't see coming. E.M.H. She'd built a financial fortress around one innocent life before the siege even started. Sitting in that law office with her handwriting under my fingers, I couldn't answer the question that kept returning. What had she seen in Vernon that I'd spent 6 decades refusing to acknowledge? 3 days before the new year, I signed my wife's name into permanent existence as a legal entity, designed to protect strangers from the exact violence our son had perfected against his own father. Quinton's Law Office, December 28th, 2 p.m. Nonprofit incorporation documents spread across the conference table. The Estelle Foundation for Harris County. Quinton read from the charter. Legal defense and emergency financial protection for elderly citizens facing predatory asset exploitation, elder abuse, and fraudulent guardianship schemes. $420,000. Medcrest liquidation restitution. Money Vernon had stolen laundered through Delaware shell companies, traced by Neil Sutton for the IRS. Not my money anymore. Not Vernon's empire, her legacy. You're turning the money Vernon stole from you into a shield for every other elderly parent in Harris County, Quinton said. I signed with surgical precision. The foundation carries Estelle's name because she would have protected them all. Every confused grandmother, every isolated grandfather. She would have seen the pattern before I did. She did see it, Quinton said quietly, 4 years before it collapsed. The door opened. Lyle Rawlings entered, the physician who'd signed Vernon's fraudulent cognitive decline diagnosis. He looked older, thinner, the weight loss that comes from watching your reputation burn in federal court. I slid the volunteer agreement across the table. Pro bono cognitive assessments for elderly victims. No salary, no redemption, just work. I can't undo what I signed in September, Lyle said, picking up the pen. But I can spend the rest of my practice making sure no other physician sells their integrity for threats. He signed. Neil Sutton joined the board 20 minutes later, Vernon's former CFO turned federal witness. New purpose: protecting the vulnerable. Building a foundation from restitution money is like grafting healthy tissue over a surgical site. You can't restore what was removed, but you can create new growth from the scar itself. Foundation opens January 1st, Quinton said. First case already filed. 74-year-old woman in Pasadena whose daughter forged power of attorney. Estelle would have fought for her without hesitation. I was 40 years too late, but the foundation would be on time. December 31st, 11:45 p.m. I carried Ivy through the north side boarding house's side entrance, the sleeping 4-year-old in pink pajamas, head on my shoulder. Room 214 stood empty, stripped bare. Tomorrow we'd move to the sunlit cottage Estelle's trust had purchased, but tonight I needed to be here one final time. The walnut pendulum clock ticked steady rhythm on the bare wall. I laid Ivy on the twin bed. She stirred, mumbled something about breakfast, settled back into sleep. I pulled Estelle's jade green Waterman from my pocket and wrote on a note card, Estelle, I have completed the surgery. Our girl sleeps beside me. I will raise her right this time. R.H. I slid it beneath the clock's wooden base where only someone dismounting the mechanism would ever find it. Distant fireworks crossed Houston. The pendulum clicked toward midnight. Grandpa, Ivy's voice half asleep. Are you still here? I'm still here, sweetheart. Good. She closed her eyes. The clock struck 12. I knelt beside her bed and pressed my palm against her forehead, the way I'd checked surgical patients for fever, for distress, for complications requiring intervention. Warm, alive, safe. I had destroyed my son to save my granddaughter, converted theft into protection for strangers, and spent my wife's name on a foundation she would have built herself if I'd listened when she tried to warn me. The pendulum ticked. Ivy breathed. Midnight arrived, carrying not an ending but a threshold. The story didn't end here. It turned the page. And to you listening, remember this: protecting the innocent sometimes means destroying the guilty, even when they're your own blood. Looking back, I spent 60 years refusing to see what my wife, Estelle, recognized immediately that my son was capable of cruelty I couldn't accept. Don't make my mistake of loving someone so blindly that you ignore the warning signs. If I'd listened to Estelle's concerns years ago, maybe Vernon would have faced consequences before he became the kind of man who could poison his own father. The lesson I learned is this: when a dad's revenge against family becomes necessary to protect the innocent, it's not vengeance, it's surgery. You cut away what's poisoned to save what's healthy. I believe God put me through this trial to teach me that mercy toward evil enables more evil. My granddaughter Ivy sleeps safely tonight because I chose her future over my son's freedom. That's the choice every parent and grandparent might face someday. Don't wait until you're 68 and poisoned to act. Protect your family from predators, even when those predators share your name. Now I want to hear from you. Would you have done what I did, destroyed your own child, to save your grandchild? Leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about a dad's revenge for family, subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. Stories of a dad's revenge to protect family matter because they remind us what's worth fighting for. One final note: while this story contains fictional elements for dramatic and educational purposes, the core message about protecting the innocent, even at great personal cost, is what I hope you carry forward. God bless you.